And now, please welcome to the stage the President and CEO of the Center for American Progress, Patrick Gaspard.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patrick Gaspard, as I think you just heard, the President and CEO of the Center for American Progress. And on behalf of CAP, which is celebrating 20 years this year of democracy building, and our extraordinary partners at the Center for Innovative Policy, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this tour across America with frontline governors and mayors who are leading the change that we need across the board on 21st century infrastructure, on renewable energy, and on building inclusive economies for all. Now, I don't know about you all, but I'm pretty fired up by President Biden's extraordinary State of the Union address last night. Wasn't that something else? It was inspired, it was uplifting, and it was also kind of a little bit feisty. You know, I think that last night, our president scored probably as many legendary points as LeBron James did. The president made clear, though, that we stand on the precipice of a pivotal moment in our nation's history, where we have the power in our hands to alter the trajectory, not just of the United States, but of the entire planet. He also reminded us of the journey that we endured over a grim 3 years as we stared down a once-in-a-century pandemic that tragically claimed the lives of over 1 million Americans and upended every aspect of how we live, from how we work, where we work, and how we learn. We also stunningly witnessed a shocking fraying of our democracy. And we continue to watch the devastation wrought by climate change from coast to coast in our nation, which continued unabated, surpassing even the wildest expectations of scientists. These challenges, we all know, every American understood that these challenges required collective action. And in one of the most closely contested Congresses that we've had in our history, President Biden and Democrats, with the help occasionally of some Republicans in the Senate, but at other times when they had to go alone, they responded. They responded resoundingly, they responded brilliantly, they responded with courage. With the legislative success that we've had these past 2 years, we've entered a new era in our country, one in which the government is no longer on the sidelines as a spectator, as good people keep getting fleeced by big oil and big pharma. Instead, with the suite of bills the president has signed into law, we're once again making strategic investments that give us the opportunity to unlock this nation's full potential, and that gives every family and every community a chance to get a hand on the next rung of the economic ladder, which for so many has been elusive. It's what the president precisely, aptly, and I think powerfully last night called a blue-collar blueprint for America. But it's not just a vision where government goes it alone. Far from crowding out private investment, this new compact calls everyone to the table: business, labor, government at all levels. And as the National Economic Council Director Brian Dees is fond of saying, it uses public investment to crowd in more private investment. This new multi-sectoral governing agenda will touch every aspect of our economy. But as you'll hear today, it's going to focus sharply and dive deeply into 3 specific areas: transportation, technological innovation, clean energy. And we've already seen some extraordinary evidence on the ground in the states where it really matters of the success of these initiatives. Already, in the time since these sweeping bills have passed, TSMC announced a $40 billion investment in manufacturing in Phoenix, Arizona, that's going to create 4,500 new and good quality jobs. Hyundai and a South Korean battery maker will invest $5 billion in a battery plant right outside of Atlanta that's going to bring in 3,500 long-term sustainable jobs. Intel announced a $20 billion construction of a chips factory in Columbus, Ohio, that's going to create 10,000 jobs in operations and in construction. And in bluegrass country in Kentucky, where I think Mitch McConnell hails from. $1.4 billion is being invested in interstate and local traffic flow at the Brent Spence Bridge, which is the second worst traffic blockage on a roadway in the country, even though it moves over $400 billion in freight each year. Now, these investments aren't just about plugging holes that have emerged over decades of neglect and disinvestment. If you watched the State of the Union address last night, you realize that something like the Spence Bridge isn't just about physical infrastructure, it's about community infrastructure and the lives of workers. We saw that sister who stood up in the gallery last night, who's an iron worker, who's been working thousands of feet above the sea floor for decades now, trying to hold together the infrastructure. This infusion of resources is giving her the capacity that she and her iron worker colleagues need to make America the great beacon and shining example that it needs to be in the next half of the 21st century. But if we're being honest, none of this progress, none of this is absolutely guaranteed. What these laws have done is create a historic opportunity, but it's an opportunity alone. What we don't want to do is to be able to look back a decade from now and feel radically disappointed at our inability to seize the day, to seize the moment, and to make good on the vision of these investments, which is exactly why I am so darn excited about today's conversations. So much of the success of this new economic strategy will hinge on the leadership and the decision-making of people that you'll hear from today. Governors and mayors from across the country, the West, the Midwest, the South, the Northeast, all of whom face enormous challenges, but who are primed to absolutely pounce on this opportunity. How we implement these laws and how quickly we're motivated to do so will really matter. Americans are restless. The planet is waiting for no one, and the world is moving so fast. As important as the consequences are for our economy, they're just as important for our democracy and the integrity of outcomes in our democracy. Getting this right is an opportunity to remind the American people of what we're capable of all doing when we all row in the same direction together. It reminds us of the immense potential that this country has when we invest in ourselves, when we invest in our people, and when we stop giving resources to the top tier of the economy alone. So this conversation that we're having today is about decisive action. It's about the sexy work of implementation. It's about the plumbing of government, but fundamentally, it's about what it means to coherently hold together a people, a community, a country. So let's get started. I have the distinct honor and privilege to bring to the stage our first extraordinary speakers, our brilliant moderator and a governor that I'm so excited about, who's just beginning the inaugural phase of his journey. Our first moderator I'm calling to stage is an award-winning journalist who centers equality and dignity in all aspects of his work. He currently writes for the Washington Post and hosts his own show on MSNBC. Given the challenges that we have in the information economy that we have in this country right now, how privileged we are to have somebody with the grace, the presence, and the intellect of Jonathan Capehart, my friend who joins us on stage. Now, you know, I've known the governor of Maryland prior to his time on the campaign trail, and I understand how public service has really coursed through his DNA long before elected office. It is core to him. He served our nation in the military, leading soldiers in combat in Afghanistan, giving the very best of himself. As a CEO of a nonprofit organization that I was privileged to partner with, he motivated more than $600 million in investments to lead families out of poverty. He's also a small business owner. What can't this brother do? He's also a small business owner, founding a company that helps underserved students build the skills that they need to get a leg up for the future. We're so excited to be able to hear about his goals and all the great work that he's going to do leading the state of Maryland. So please, a hearty applause for the executive of the state of Maryland, Governor Wes Moore.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon.
So we don't have a whole lot of time. So we have to pretend like we're on an expanded edition of the Sunday show. So last night was the State of the Union, Governor, and the president was fired up, feisty, talking about his accomplishments. I'm wondering, now that you're just about, what, 3 weeks into your governorship, your reactions to the president's State of the Union address and how it dovetails, or maybe not, with what you're trying to do as governor.
Yeah, thank you. And first, can I say to Patrick and all the captains, bless you and thank you for this invitation and for your leadership and how thankful I am to be with you always, man. And I said back there, and I mean it, and I'll say it again, I'm so proud of you. And I'm so thankful for who you are as a person and the professional that you are. So bless you and thank you.
Thank you.
And listen, the president should have been feisty and fired up because he's got a lot to brag about. You know, facts are facts. I mean, and I think about it from the state of Maryland, from our perspective, how thankful I am to have this administration as a partner. In just our first 3 weeks, we have announced and launched an investment of $5 million going to broadband expansion throughout the state. And by the way, that was announced at one of Maryland's 4 remarkable HBCUs, which is going to be the housing area for it. We announced a multi-billion-dollar initiative for the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, which is going to enhance high-speed rail within the Baltimore region, getting from the Baltimore region down to Washington, D.C. in an environmentally friendly way. That's in the first couple weeks, right? This partnership matters. And so, frankly, when I heard the president speaking last night, I felt like he was talking to Maryland. He was talking to middle-class families all across this country. That when he says things like, we are going to invest in, you know, and making sure that we can put a cap on $35 on insulin, that's speaking to a whole lot of Maryland families. When he talks about things like, you know, making sure that we can have, and I've said that Maryland is going to be a safe haven for abortion rights, where in my first day in office, we released $3.5 million of previously withheld funds to train abortion providers. And tomorrow there's going to be a pretty exciting announcement that you'll see about how Maryland, how when I say abortion is healthcare, I mean that. And we're going to make sure that our state follows through. We heard the president talk about that last night. We heard the president talk about his support of veterans. So he should be feisty. And he should be excited about the future, because I think if you look at the track record for the first 2 years, we've got a strong partner. And that means a lot to me, and it means a lot to our state. And as a state chief executive, I'm thankful for that.
You want to talk more about this announcement you're going to make tomorrow? I mean, we're all ears.
I think Maryland Speaker of the House might kill me if I say anything more. But I'll say this: when we talked about the idea that Maryland will be a safe haven for abortion rights, you know, the pledge that I made is that it is going to be a safe haven for abortion rights as long as I am the governor of the state of Maryland. What we are making sure is that Maryland needs to be a safe haven for abortion rights, even when I'm not the governor. And that's the kind of work that we're doing, permanent, substantial work to make sure that when we say abortion is healthcare, we mean that. And in the state of Maryland, it is going to be protected.
So I'm going to pick up on something. You talked about the Frederick Douglass Tunnel. And recently you said you can't have economic mobility if you don't have physical mobility. And this was in relation to transportation funding in your first budget. Talk more about that. It's not just about this tunnel.
It's you know, when we're on the campaign trail, we talked a lot about why it was important to invest in transit, specifically mass transit. And, you know, and I said during the campaign trail that the decision to eliminate something that was called the Red Line, which was east-west transit within the Baltimore region, which, by the way, also meant we had to return $1 billion back to the federal government. I was very clear that that decision alone was almost disqualifiable, because that money was returned as if that money wasn't needed in communities. During the campaign trail, I said, you know what, if I was living in West Baltimore and I got a job down in Fells Point, down by the harbor, and let's say I was working the midnight shift, how long would it take me? And this area in West Baltimore, Mondawmin Mall, is one of the main transportation hubs. The answer was, and I did it, the answer was, it took me over an hour and a half to go about 2 miles. I could have almost walked there faster. We have areas of our society and our community where, frankly, the idea of economic mobility just feels like a very bad joke. Because if I cannot get to the opportunity, then what's the point? And so part of the reason in our first budget, I released our first budget 2 days after I was inaugurated. So when we were laughing, we had inauguration on Wednesday, and I said, everyone party responsibly, but Thursday's a working day. We meant that was a working day. And so literally in 2 days after I was inaugurated, we released our budget, which included $500 million, so exclusively dedicated towards transportation assets in the state of Maryland. That's also being used to leverage capital that's coming from the federal side and from our private partners. This work matters because if we're going to actually get people from where they live to where opportunities lie, it means we've got to be intentional. It means we have to be deliberate. And it means we need to have projects that are going to happen on time and on cost. And that's the commitment that we are making to the people of this state, that we are going to take this seriously and we're going to move fast on this.
Talk about education, because it's one thing to have economic opportunity and the physical apparatus in place so that people can get to the jobs, but you got to educate the populace so that they can take advantage of the opportunities, the economic opportunities. What do you have in your sights for improving education in Maryland?
There's two things that I tell the people of our state if they look at how we're moving in these first weeks. One is, for everything that we're doing, there are no surprises. Everything we're doing, we campaigned on for the past 2 years. And the second thing that I want people to understand is, if I said it, I meant it. And if you look at the fact that we made the single largest investment in public education of any governor in the history of the state of Maryland, it was because education is going to be the linchpin for everything we're trying to accomplish. And so what we mean by that is this, is that we have to, and we're going to invest in and prioritize things like making sure that there is pre-K for every single child in need in the state of Maryland. And I'm excited to even work with, I know Patrick, and I say all the work that he did even prior to here on this exact issue. We're excited to work together on it as well and to learn and to grow, because if we have a situation where, and again, I say this simply because, I'm the science and the data behind it is very clear. 80% of brain development happens in a child by the time that child is 5 years old. So why we have children starting school at 5 makes absolutely no sense. Maryland is going to fix that, and we're going to start this year. That when we say we're going to invest and actually incentivize educators to come back into a classroom, we have a very severe challenge and a shortage of teachers. It's why one of the bills that I presented to the General Assembly is something called the Maryland Teacher Shortage Act, where we're investing $15 million in both incentivizing teachers to stay and incentivizing teachers to come, because we've got to create a stronger pipeline of educators, quality educators inside of our classroom, and that includes specifically targeting educators of color. When I say things like Maryland is going to be the first state in this country to have a service year option for every single high school graduate, and that's another bill that we have and that we're proposing for this year that we're working with the legislature to get done, and that we are going to say that while we have some of the best four-year institutions in the country in the state of Maryland, not every student needs to attend one to be successful. And so it's about how are we opening apparatus and pathways for all students to have a measurement of economic growth, regardless of where their pathway goes. And I explain to students, going to a four-year college at first wasn't my pathway. I joined the Army when I was 17 years old. I started off at a 2-year college. I think things worked out pretty well. So we have to create pathways for students to be able to have measurements of growth and success, no matter which pathway they go, and investing in education, not just K through 12 education, but also pathways for higher education growth is something that is going to be a priority for how our administration is going to go about its work.
How confident are you that, you need the federal government on some of these to partner with the federal government to achieve some of your goals in your term? What do you need? Just give me, I know there's probably a lot of things, but just give me the one thing that you need from the federal government, especially now that you have a partner in the White House.
Yeah. I need the federal government to continue to see that they could not have a better partner than Maryland. We've got an incredibly educated population. We have core anchor institutions within the state of Maryland. I mean, the state of Maryland, is literally home of some of the top institutions of higher education in this country. We have 4 of the top HBCUs in America in the state of Maryland. And when I think about the type of work that the federal government is doing and investments that they're making, I want them to see that Maryland is the place and Maryland has the team and leadership that can go make these things happen. So, for example, one of the things that's being discussed and debated right now is where the new FBI building is going to go. This is a top priority for me. And it's a top priority for me, not just because Maryland has a place where if you look at Prince George's County, where we would house it, it has an incredibly educated population and the most affluent African American population in this country. But it's also a place that has been chronically underinvested in when it comes to federal investment. Chronically. So if we believe that equity and fairness is something that should be at the forefront of how we're talking about our investment measurements. And by the way, a location that has strong public transportation, a strong education system, and strong leadership that can make sure that we're actually leveraging that investment. You could not pick a better place than Maryland and could not pick a better place than Prince George's County to have the new FBI building. That's the kind of partnership that we want to continue seeing with the federal government, that they look at Maryland as a strong partner and a place that we are going to take that word partnership very, very seriously.
Sounds great.
I hope the federal government thinks so.
Well, so now you've got the president, Democrat, friend of yours, sitting in the White House. You've got Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat, running the Senate. And then you got Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, who, as we saw last night, has no control over his caucus. So how will you, as governor of Maryland, work with, because it's great to have relationships and a great partner in the White House, but what about on the other side of the aisle, particularly when the Republicans control the House? Do you have any relationships over there?
We do. And the thing is, when people say, well, how do you plan on, working with folks on the other side and working with Republicans in the House or Republicans in Maryland? My honest answer is it's the only way that I've ever led. I tell people, when I was leading soldiers in Afghanistan, do you know a question I never once asked my soldiers? What's your political party? It never came up. We had one job, one goal, and one mission. And my job was to unify our unit and to go out and accomplish it. And we did. And I think about the legislative agenda that we just laid out in the state of Maryland. We just laid out 9 bills that are the governor's bills. And that includes everything from how are we focusing on making sure that we can get health care and dental care to all members of the Maryland National Guard? How are we making sure that Maryland is the best place in America for our veterans? How are we focusing on things like a service year option and making sure that the state of Maryland is going to actually attack and end child poverty by having enhancements of the EITC and permanently making sure that the CTC, the child tax credit, is permanent in the state of Maryland, and raising the minimum wage to $15 and indexing it to inflation. Right. This is the most aggressive package that this state has ever seen when it comes to addressing child poverty. And by the way, of the 9 bills that we proposed to the legislature, I have Republican co-sponsors on 6 of them. The point is this. The argument that we are making to the state is if we are divided, we can't win. But if we as a state stand united, we can't lose. I think about the fact that we won our election with more individual votes than any person who's ever run for a governor in the history of the state of Maryland. We ended up winning by the largest margin in close to 40 years in our state. And I say the only way you get to that number is not just because we won Democrats. We got to that number because we won Democrats, we won independents, and we won a big chunk of Republicans. The reason that we were able to win is because we went everywhere and we were making our case. And I tell you, just on Monday, we went out to a place called Laconing, which is in far Western Maryland, a place where I think I was the only Democrat within miles of where I was standing. And we went out there because they were having a water crisis. And every single day we've been working with their local government and speaking with their mayor about ways we can help. And when we went out to visit Laconing, do you know what the mayor told me? He said, "You're the first governor to ever come visit our town since 1996. That includes Democrat and Republican governors. We can do this, but we have to be able to show the other side that when I say partnership, I mean that. And if we can actually work on these things together and show that these are not, ending child poverty is not a Democratic issue. That's a huge problem in Laconia, right? If we can show that and show that there's not just data behind it, but that we are serious about this idea of partnership, we're going to be able to earn not just the trust of the other side, but their votes."
Let me try this again. And I hear what you're saying. And that works really well in Maryland. I'm just wondering, if you had the opportunity to sit down with Speaker McCarthy and tell him one thing, what would you tell him?
I would tell him this. I would say that when you think about the economic future of everything that we are trying to, of everything we're trying to accomplish and trying to get done, when we're talking about pathways for work, wages, and wealth for all people in our communities, and I can speak for Maryland, but I'm talking about all across the country, that it's actually going to be to his long-term political benefit to be able to make sure that this work is actually getting done. Because you can't go back to your people and say, "We haven't delivered anything, but we fought the good fight." That's a very tiring argument for people who feel consistently like they're being left out of the conversation. That you're saying, "Yeah, we haven't gotten anything done for you, but remember, I stood up to the bad man." That argument gets real tired real quick. And so the argument that I would make is that, listen, you have a unique opportunity to be able to actually make good for a lot of people who have struggled for a very long time and have felt chronically left behind. I see them every single day. And the thing that we know when it comes to the way we navigate it in Maryland is this: there are going to be certain folks that I know we might not be able to reach, no matter how hard I try. And that's great. But there's two things that I do know with that. One, I'm still going to keep trying. And two, the beauty of democracy is I don't need every vote. If we can just stay focused and make good for the promise, for the people in our jurisdictions, Democrat, Independents, and Republicans, and show them that we are working together to make this work happen. For the ones who will never vote for me for whatever reasons, the ones who will never support me for whatever reason, I understand that, and there will be some of those. But my point is this: there's not enough of them. We can still make good things happen.
I think this is going to be my last question to you before it goes to Q&A. You've been in the job how many days?
19.
19 days. Does the job in reality meet your expectations of what you thought the job would be when you were running for governor?
Ooh. It's beautiful because, so many of these issues I've been working on for much of my adult life. And I think about now that we have this unique opportunity to be able to get things done in strokes of pens. We've been talking about the importance of service for much of my career. How it's important to make sure that we are creating a culture of service, that service will save us. And we've been working on this repeatedly. And in day one of office, I created a department of service and civic innovation in the state of Maryland, the first state in this country to now have an office that's exclusively focusing on service, taking the best ideas and bringing them to scale, and making sure we're supporting our state workforce in the stroke of a pen. I've been fighting for things like adjustments in the permanent and making permanent the child tax credit now for a decade. And literally in our first budget, in the stroke of a pen, we now have a proposal that is going to be the largest and most permanent expansion of the child tax credit, which is going to lift 152,000 children out of poverty in the stroke of a pen. And so there's a beauty to this job that we can move with a sense of speed and a sense of scale that I think is just very heartening for a person like myself who's been a direct contact worker for so long. But it's definitely not lost to me at all that there are parts of this job and there are days where you feel the enormity of it quickly. Whether it was a few days ago where we sent off the 126th Aviation Brigade to go deploy overseas. Men and women who now are going to be heading overseas for a year. And when I tell them that, you know, not only do we appreciate their service, but I will be here when you redeploy and you come back home. But knowing as their commander in chief that you've just sent men and women off to conflict. And you hope and you pray that every one of them make it back home. That, you know, last Friday, where, you know, we're getting a call, and I have to thank the White House and also the leadership in Memphis and Tennessee for their leadership. And we get a call saying, we just want to let you know that a video is going to be released later on today and you need to be prepared for it. And having not even seen that video, I already knew what was on it. And you're now preparing you're speaking with the head of the National Guard. You're speaking with the head of the state police. And you're preparing for what could happen. But at the same time, I'm knowing that I'm going through and I'm processing all this, not just as the governor of Maryland and not just as the only African-American governor in this country, but as a human being, seeing what we had to witness. So there is a weight to this job that you know is coming, but you don't understand until it sits there. But the thing that always keeps you excited and fired up and motivated and knowing that I have to take these 1,437 days seriously. That's how many days I have in my first term. Because you know that the work that we do every single day, it matters. And not just to the people now, but for generations to come. And that's what I love about this job.
I didn't really think you liked the job. I had to ask that question because when we were in the green room, he's like bouncing off the walls. He's so excited about being governor. Governor, I believe there are 2 questions, and they're going to be read right now.
Our first question is from Rick Klein at ABC News. What are your thoughts on what we heard from President Biden last night on the State of the Union address, and what stood out to you?
I'm sorry, who asked that question?
Rick Klein of ABC News.
Rick Klein. Thank you so much. You know, well, first, I love the fact that the president led with facts and data. Because I think, again, what the president said is absolutely right, where we're talking about a job growth in 2 years that we have not seen a president accomplish in 4. That's facts. That's numbers. That when we're talking about, you know, brand new record investments in infrastructure, that's not just hyperbole. I can tell you as the chief executive of the state of Maryland, that's real because we've been there. We're putting that capital to work in the state of Maryland. And yes, he is right when he says that there are people who voted against it who were at those groundbreakings. So the thing I think that stuck out to me was that the president is moving full force into not just a reminder to this country about what's been accomplished over these past few years, but moving full force with and helping people understand that we still got work to do, and that we've got to be able to move in partnership in order to make this happen. And I think the thing that is important for people to remember, despite all the back and forth and a lot of the clickbait, is he was very clear in terms of extending a sense of partnership to everybody in that chamber, no matter which side of the chamber they were sitting on, and helping them to understand that we have a chance to do something special and that we have a real opportunity to do so. And just because you are not, just because you're not in the dominant party at that point, does that not mean that your job is to be the opposition until you get another shot. Your job is to help govern. And so it's the same thing that we try to push and stress in our state of the state. Where I was explaining to the Republicans over in Maryland, saying, just because it happened to be a Democrat who's sitting in the governor's seat does not mean that I now need you all to sit on the sidelines and just throw rocks from the outside over the next 4 years. I need you to be a partner. And I was heartened by the fact that that was the posture that the president also took last night as well.
Our second question is from our online audience. How do you plan to balance investments in both the cities, Baltimore, the DC suburbs, and Annapolis, with investments on the Eastern Shore and the Western counties?
When we were out on the campaign trail, we spent a lot of time in the rural parts of the state of Maryland. And it got to a point that literally people were writing articles about it because we were spending a whole lot of time where there weren't a lot of Democrats. So these weren't people who couldn't even, vote for us in a primary. And people would ask the question, they're like, why are you spending so much time in areas of the state that there's not a lot of Democrats? And I said, well, because there's a lot of Marylanders. And I plan on being their governor too. And so when we're going out there, like how we went out, our first official visit as the governor was out to Western Maryland. Next week on Monday, we're going down to Southern Maryland. Later on in the week, we're heading to the Eastern Shore. It's not because we need votes or it's because it's a photo op. It's because when we talk about a leave no one behind agenda, which is what we ran on. And if you now, for all those people who are entering into the state of Maryland, you now see the sign, welcome to Maryland, Governor Wes Moore. And then under it, you see, leave no one behind. That is the new mission of the state of Maryland. And that doesn't mean leave no one behind if you live in urban areas, or leave no one behind if you live in the Baltimore region, or leave no one behind if you happen to be in a majority African-American area. It means leave no one behind. And so the commitments that we are making, the investments that we are making all throughout this state, record investments, and showing that you can be bold and you can be ambitious, and that doesn't mean you're being reckless. I think people are seeing all throughout the state of Maryland that we meant what we said. And so I tell people, for those who voted for me, I appreciate it. And I plan to work to keep your support. And for those who didn't vote for me, I just ask and I pray that you give space and grace for us to earn your vote in the future, because I think our job is to go make sure that we earn it.
And with that, we're going to have to leave it there. The 63rd governor of Maryland in his 19th day, Wes Moore. Governor Moore, thank you. Thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Jamal Simmons, former communications director to the vice president and former deputy assistant to the president. Thank you.
Hey. Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here with Governor Tim Walz. I am getting used to being back on stage. I spent about a year at the White House with the vice president. So we were planning things like this. In fact, one of the things that we did when I was there was we were in Minnesota with you when in a race that all the reports were that the race was tightening. I know we're not supposed to get political here, but the reports were the race was tightening, and then you smoked that guy.
Jamal showed up, vice president showed up. We win by a landslide. So well done.
All right, very good. So Governor, I just wanted to first start by giving you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about how the world worked out for you in Minnesota after the pandemic, because when you first came in the office, I think you had about a year before the pandemic set in. And then after that, you guys had a pretty good and robust set of statistics. Unemployment rate was great and growth was happening. And just tell us how that worked out for you.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time to be here. And wasn't this first group with Governor Moore? It's exciting. I said we always, as Minnesotans, there's two things we're going to talk about: weather and then our connections with our host being a Minnesotan, or at least going to school there. Yeah, look, being a Midwestern state, in 2019 we come in. I think Minnesota, probably prior to 2020, was kind of this cold progressive state that was out there and doing some good things. And then the pandemic, and then in the midst of the pandemic, George Floyd's murder. and the world was looking at Minnesota a little differently. And again, we've got a lot of advantages. We're home to the highest concentration of Fortune 500 companies: General Mills, Target, Best Buy, Cargill, 3M, home of the Mayo Clinic. We also, if you eat turkey, it came from Minnesota, leading turkey producing state. We got a very diverse economy. We have a fifth of the world's water, fresh water, lots of things going. But like many states dealing with both COVID and again, blessed with an infrastructure like the Mayo Clinic and others, we were able to handle it pretty well. But demographically, northern states are aging, and we have to address what does a workforce look like to fill these jobs and to innovate where we've always been on the front end of that. So I think with COVID, the challenges were there and addressed, and we're very proud that we were one of the states with the lowest death rates and many of those things, but it also got us really focused on long-term workforce development, long-term demographics of what the state of Minnesota is going to look like. How do we keep people there? How do we get them ready to work? And how do we make, just candidly on this, how do we make sure in that reputation repair that Black professionals and others say, that's a state that is welcoming to me, we want to be there. And that's what we've been tackling.
So as you're tackling that, you are in a new political environment. You've got Democratic control of the legislature. You've got a Democratic president who has passed some pretty significant bills that have put billions of dollars into investment in the country and infrastructure and training and workforce and research. What opportunities do you see in this environment for a state like Minnesota?
Yeah, it's amazing. I spent my first term being one of one or two states at one time. We had a divided legislature. The House was DFL. We're not Democrats in Minnesota. We're Democrat farmer labor. And the Republicans had the Senate, which meant nothing could get done, really. We did some bipartisan work. I came from Congress where I represented a district that when I won in 2016, President Trump won by 20 points. Like 50,000 people voted for President Trump and me. It still keeps me up at night, like trying to figure this out. But we were seeing this change. We were seeing a bipartisanness start to grind down. And what we were able to do this year was we got the trifecta of having that. And what has happened since that time is we've codified Roe, the first state in the nation to be able to do that. We were able yesterday, I signed 100% clean energy by 2040 with all of our labor and all of our utility participants on board with that. We're a clean car state, really the only one off the coast in Colorado. And we moved last week to make Juneteenth a state holiday, and the Crown Act of discrimination against hair. All these things are happening, restoring driver's licenses. So this pent up energy that was there, this desire to try and do it, all predicated on how do we make sure, the big part about this is, how do we make sure that Minnesota is an affordable and welcoming state for people? Paid family medical leave. Some of the things that we will be implementing, a child tax credit, as I heard Governor Moore talk about these things. These are the way to strengthen the middle class. These are the ways to lift children out of poverty. We rank third in childhood poverty, third best in the country. But until we quit using those statistics, that is a zero-sum proposition. No child should live in poverty. And that's not just an aspirational thing. We're doing measured things that we can do, from child tax credit to major investments in early childhood education. So it's as you can tell, again, many of us thought dealing with playing in Minnesota terms, goalie all the time in hockey. We're now doing the Gretzky thing. We're skating where the puck's going to be in 20 years. And that is a diversified workforce that feels welcomed, where reproductive rights are protected, where the environmental concerns are put at the forefront, and job growth and innovation comes out of that. So I tell you, the world changed. The world entirely changed. And with a partner in the federal government, I got to witness that in what it means to have a federal partner during COVID that didn't view COVID as important and did view COVID as important. And for the states, all the difference.
All right. So let's circle back to something you mentioned very briefly, quickly. The 100% clean energy by 2040. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, it's exciting. We already had, in 2007, we had a renewable fuel standards. And at that point in time was pretty cutting edge. But Minnesota, and we met it. We met our goals by this, a 23% reduction by 2022 in carbon emissions. Now, some of that came from the economic slowdown of the pandemic, but we're moving in that direction. We're making sure now that all of the electrical generation in Minnesota by 2040 will be there. And this is like with XL Energy, our major energy producers are out there. This gives them some flexibilities. There'll be some ability to trade some of these, but we're going to make that investment and hold firm to it that we can get to that. And what we're seeing, the innovation springing from that, whether it's the largest solar manufacturer has now moved to northern Minnesota. We're getting partnerships as we look globally with countries like Finland, who are working closely with us, both on clean air, clean water technology. We're seeing that countries are going to invest in states that actually care about this and move forward. So this 100% bill is, again, has labor on board. We see it as a job creation opportunity. And of course, again, the existential threat of climate change. So it's an exciting time. And what we're trying to do, and I make the case on this, if we're going to move to this clean energy economy, Minnesota wants to be there to be the place where we manufacture, the place where we do the innovation, the place where we implement that. And I think we can't be aggressive enough on this because, again, the competition is already global to a point that we're losing our competitive advantage, especially in those spaces. Minnesota wants to lead in that. And again, I think it's really important that you get a Midwestern state that does this, whether it's women's reproductive rights or those types of things. We're living in an interesting neighborhood in where we're at, and we're making sure that we're the place that attracts folks.
So I grew up in your neighborhood. I grew up in Michigan. I lived in Washington most of my adult life in DC, but so I'm very intimately familiar with a phenomenon that a lot of governors are wrestling with, which is how do you have the opportunities in your state for young people to grow up, thrive, and then stick around so they're close to their parents, their grandparents. How are you thinking about that life cycle for a young person in your state?
Yeah, and we're thinking broadly and holistically. My lieutenant governor, who is, if you get a chance, is dynamic. She is an Ojibwe woman, the first Native American woman to hold executive office in this country, and brings a perspective to this where she was with Children's Defense Fund before, and their motto is children don't come in pieces. So one of the first things we're doing, we're reorganizing state government around children, youth, and families. Minnesota does have universal pre-K, universal kindergarten, but we're focusing on the life cycle of this, whether it's child tax credit, whether it's families making up to $200,000 can receive up to $10,500 in direct reimbursements for childcare, making sure all of these investments in the life cycle, as you heard Governor Moore talk about, you all know the statistics in here, closing the achievement gap after they're past age 5 gets really expensive and really hard, and it starts to disaggregate the data. It falls most heavily on communities of color. We're making sure we focus there, that we understand that, and then move through the life cycle of folks, making sure both that educational opportunities are there, but the things that make life more affordable. I can't stress this enough. Trying to make sure we're going to have a public option in healthcare. We already have Minnesota Care. We have the highest number of folks already insured of any state. We want to continue to build upon that. All of those things, making sure that you can afford to have a child. And when you have them, the resources and the support networks are there behind them. And again, it's not, I mean, it's morally the right thing to do, but it's not totally altruistic. We need a workforce that's able to produce and to be there to go forward. Because again, aging northern states are going to have to be creative. We think focusing on that entire life cycle of folks, especially with the children, makes a huge difference.
So I've heard you talk about doubling down on the workforce, doubling down on innovation. States that do that are the ones that have a future here. Talk to us a little bit about, again, how the federal government might be helpful to you. I know Riverland Community College? Riverland, I can't even read my own handwriting. Riverland Community College, $1.9 million in terms of
these targeted investments, and this is in manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing and welding. We're a major manufacturing state. We make jets in Minnesota, Cirrus jets. We make tractors in Minnesota. We are the 5th most diverse economy. But when you do that, you have these major areas where you're going to need to have that educational focus and very early. The federal government has been incredible partners. I didn't add to this. The reason that we're so excited, not with just a trifecta, our biennium budget in Minnesota is about $26 billion. So we spend about a yearly $52 billion for the cycle of that. We are setting on roughly a $20 billion surplus that is going to be able to return money back to folks, be able to fund what we're looking at. the federal government's partnership on these programs that we've seen, the federal government's work around, and it doesn't get talked enough about. I sat on the transportation committee for many years, and I got so sick of transportation week up here that I'm like, yeah, right. It's never going to happen. Don't forget the IIJA. What it's going to do is transformational for us as we're viewing from transit projects to long-term ability to think about how Minnesota's connected. And the Inflation Reduction Act around our clean energy technology and them targeting these things, it's a huge difference. This is, if you're looking for opportunities across this country and you're looking to be optimistic, and I know it doesn't sell, that's what we were talking about the president's speech last night, is it was optimistic and vigorous on this. Again, booing doesn't get us anywhere, and we know they're not going to offer anything. We need to seize this moment and offer those big opportunities because they are there. And again, I'm an eternal optimist. Before I got in this job in Congress, I was a high school teacher. I supervised the lunchroom for 20 years. I am, honest to God, I am the most optimistic person in the world, but I'm a realist. You don't go in there just hoping the day is going to go well, because it does not. And I think states that are doing measurable things, that we're saying we're going to use the child tax credit, reduce childhood poverty by 25%. We've got to be more measurable. We've got to see results. And I think the populace out there is waiting to see some of these positive things. There's reasons to be optimistic right now. There's a lot of positive innovation happening. I don't think you hear it enough.
I think it's interesting that in that one Minnesota budget you've been talking about, it sounds like you're clearly focused on low income families and making sure the supports are there for them, but you're also taking care of those families that are caught in the middle, the ones that aren't wealthy enough to take care of everything on their own. They aren't maybe low income enough that they're going to support it for everything else, but they're kind of caught in that middle. Tell us a little bit about how you're going to support those middle income families.
Yeah, that's right. And again, looking for this workforce thing, and those of you in here, and I know I wouldn't ask you to do it and raise your hand because I've been there. I remember I felt like the happiest day of my life is when my child moved out of daycare, and I'm like, oh, I was going to public school. And then somebody said, don't worry, they're going to college at some point. So it picks back up again. But the idea was for my family, 2 teachers, strictly middle-class folks out in Minnesota. We had a house, small house, did all that. The cost of childcare, the cost of some of these things. And we're really focusing for those middle-class families to do that. Opportunities on educational affordability that really does matter to them. And because too many times, and I'm very conscious of this, when we're giving back like a tax rebate and we set a cap on it of $150,000 or whatever, you start to create this internal class warfare that has been very successful for folks having middle-class people punch down on those below them, blaming that's why somehow manufacturing left or whatever. We're being very deliberate. And again, not anti-business in any way. And again, I'm paying for these things, both using a surplus, and in Minnesota, I've asked that we're going to have the capital gains tax on making $1 million and more go up. I don't apologize for people paying tax on capital gains. It's income tax. And I've always viewed it that way. So pay it. That helps pay for these things. We know that this idea, well, all the rich folks are going to move out and move to Florida. That's not what's happening. You know who's moving out is folks who can't afford to live in states where they're able to send their kids to good daycare. They're able to think about what college looks like. They're able to afford housing. Housing is a piece of this. Of that surplus, we're taking about $3 billion of it and putting it into affordable housing. Every city across Minnesota, this is a major issue. People can live wherever they want and work where they're at now if they have housing, if they have good schools, if they have internet access. And we're making the case, again, it looks good to move south. And trust me, I'm talking about the weather. I always, it's warm here. I just left the cold or whatever. When it's 140 in Phoenix, Duluth, Minnesota is going to look pretty good because it's just the way it is. So I think states that are looking, how are we going to make this a place where people say, you know what, I want to live there and I can afford to live there. So I think this point Jamal's making is we can't leave out those folks. I know 200,000 sounds like an awful lot to people. It doesn't if you're living in DC. It does if you're living in Roseau, Minnesota. But there's a whole lot of folks that are in the middle part there that are wondering, what can I do? Life's becoming expensive. And those of us at a certain age, we're caring for parents, trying to pay for college at the same time.
So I know Minnesota is diversifying as much as any other state. I know in part of what you've talked about doing in education, meals for every kid, also focus on English language learners.
Yeah.
How are you handling that diversity that's happening in the state? And are you getting any blowback from any of the other residents who are there?
No, and again, we didn't mention that we're doing universal meals. Can you believe, and I did this too, honest to God, I'm not kidding you on that. I supervised the lunchroom. kids used to have different colored lunch tickets and you knew what they got. And if they didn't have their ticket, they got like a sandwich instead of real food. For God's sakes, we give 3 meals to our prisoners every single day, and our kids are coming to school and their families are trying to figure out how to pay for it. We're starting to level some of that. The issue in Minnesota was, yes, we were predominantly Northern Europeans that settled there. And as we started to diversify, and we see this, and it used to be that we would admire, it took a long time. In Minnesota, they say if a problem comes up, the response is, oh, we should have pie. And then you're just like, everything, that you've heard our passive aggressiveness or whatever. But there was a tendency, we do rank very high. We rank as some of the highest outcomes in education, highest outcomes in incomes. We rank very high. Our problem is when you disaggregate that data, nobody wants to talk about that because the gap between that in our communities of color and our Black community is pretty pronounced. Couple that with what people saw back in May, and we're making the case that we need to be responsive. We need to make sure we're out there. We need to make sure that everyone feels welcome. So I don't think I would say it's the blowback, but when you have a state that is not as racially diverse and is learning to live with this over the last 25 or 30 years, there's a tendency for a lot of folks to not see what the problem was or misplace blame on why we're getting those results. We know why we're getting those results because in many cases, we've not allowed the Black community to acquire generational wealth. So we know all of the things from childhood and starting out. Our goal is things like down payment assistance and waiving on that. We want our communities of color to own homes in their community, business assistance for those, and making no bones about it. We are making up for systemic barriers that kept that community back. Minneapolis, some of you know this, Minneapolis, St. Paul area, St. Paul. This is true everywhere, and I'm glad that Secretary Buttigieg recognized this. We had a very vibrant and a lot of wealth in a community called Rondo, and we divided that with a highway. Imagine that, all of you in here have that story. We took that land, divided it, and destroyed all that generational wealth. We're working now is we're going to put a land bridge, cap that thing, make investments again, and try. Now, I know you can't artificially reignite what was a vibrant community that was there overnight, but you can send that message. And I make this case too. There's a moral responsibility for us to get this, but our workforce in Minnesota, while I think Jamal was looking at some of the statistics, it's going to quickly diversify. And over the next 25 years, the majority of our workforce is going to come from communities of color. Well, we darn sure better make sure they've got a quality education, housing to live in, ready to go, or companies like General Mills and Target and Best Buy and 3M and the Mayo Clinic, where are they going to get their workforce from? Not to mention all the new startups. But we're making that case. We're hearing it. We have the second best business environment for folks. We've had some of the highest startup opportunities, and the state wants to be partners in it.
So Jonathan asked this question of Governor Moore. I'm going to ask it a little bit differently. Not so much about what you need from the federal government. That's always important. But what do you think the federal government should be learning from you?
Well, I just think results for people. I think being data driven. I said, I served 12 years in Congress. I heard that question about asking Governor Moore if he, what the job expected is. If you've been in Congress, you could only pray to be a governor because, I'm like, oh, thank God I'm not, I'm watching that thing last night at the State of the Union saying, no way. It's what we should know is what people respond to is results. And I'm not talking about stomping on and doing, but if there are things that the data and the public supports, do it. We knew in Minnesota that people supported abortion is healthcare, and we don't need you to parse it in any way. Just codify it and leave us alone. We did that type of thing. That's what they're asking for. We should not be afraid to deal with the issues that the public is there. And I wish the federal government would incentivize that, would do that, and would recognize that when you move on some of these things, the data is very clear. We'll start to see the results that we want to see. And I come from a district. I say, I was the second Democrat since 1892 to get elected in that district. And folks there want to see the same results. They want to see things get done. And I struggle with this too. How do we appeal to a divided America that is both urban, where you deal with a lot of these issues? But here's the fact of the matter is, housing is a major concern in rural Minnesota. Workforce shortage is a major concern in rural Minnesota. And I think what I would tell to the federal government is, if there's anything, and I don't get it, I don't get how some of these people go back home and don't deliver anything, how they get reelected. You're going to see this, the debt ceiling vote. You should get fired if you vote against that. I mean, that should be a given. But, and I say that I voted for it when it was President Bush. I voted for it when it was President Obama, and I voted for it when it was with President Trump. Because it has nothing to do with the spending. I just, again, I think what you're going to see is, and I'm not so cynical to believe that everybody here is just worried about their own political future, but some of them worry about it. You're going to do well if you deliver on these things. These are not divisive issues. They really aren't. Maybe the codification of Roe, I don't know. It shouldn't be. It polls incredibly high. But these economic issues, people want to see them.
And just a pet issue of mine, I saw you're building out broadband to 33,000 homes and businesses across the state, urban and rural. That's going to also be a big difference. All right, we got a question from the floor.
Yes, we have a question from our online audience. How are you, Governor, and Minnesota legislators planning to support the workers who are attending and caring for our children and elderly?
Yeah, well, first of all, we just we finalized contracts with SEIU for our home care workers. $20 starting. We're going to give them orientations about that. They are unionized in Minnesota. And I'm just going to state it here. Minnesota is a union state, and that is only going to continue. That is only going to continue. So I think first and foremost, getting their contracts where they're at, lifting up where it needs to be. And here's the other thing why this is so important with both our children and our long-term care. Those industries are under huge stress. And if it's the business community, again, is our biggest ally in this issue to fix childcare. They are our biggest ally because they know that it matters where their workforce is going to come from. And all of us care deeply about that with parents in the long-term care. We're seeing it both in helping on the funding. One of the things we did with certified nursing assistants, I had National Guard troops in nursing homes during COVID because the staff was sick and couldn't be there. We fast-tracked and started and went out and recruited about 1,500 folks, 320 of them high school students, to fast-track onto certified nursing assistants to get them out there. And when we started asking why people weren't in this, why they weren't working, why these were open, this wouldn't surprise any of you. The two reasons that were holding people back from going to the certified nursing program was transportation and childcare for their own children so they could go. Once we fixed childcare with them, said, we'll pay for it, we'll pay for your transportation to get there, and we'll pay for your education that was there. We had a flood of folks come in. We've now licensed them. If we should see COVID or something else come back again, we've got a resilient workforce that is younger, ready to go, trained, and now sees wages that actually look livable. And I think the government's going to have a piece of it. Adam Smith's invisible hand is not going to fix this by it. It's not like moving around there and paying them. So,
All right. All right. Well, that covers our time for the day. Thank you.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. We will now take a brief 15-minute break. Thank you. Restarting our program in 5 minutes. 5 minutes until we restart our program. If everyone would please take their seats, we'll be restarting momentarily. Please take your seats. We will be restarting momentarily. Please welcome to the stage the Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, and Mara Rudman, Executive Vice President for Policy at the Center for American Progress.
Governor, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know you've been in a relay race here and a very tight schedule, and we so appreciate that you are fitting us in to your day and to your time here. And we also particularly appreciate that you're here with us because we have had the opportunity to speak with you before. We know from all of your work how much Colorado is really a pace setter on a number of the issues that we want to talk about today, and really looking forward to your insights on just how effective we can be as a country, states and localities, and what we at CAP and Center for Innovative Policy can be doing to maximize the success of these significant government investments that are poised to go out. And we feel like you have a lot of experience in the ways that Colorado has led already. So really appreciate your being here with us today. I'm wondering, Governor, if we could start with focusing perhaps particularly on historic investments in clean energy jobs, and the potential that has to bolster our economy and to mitigate climate change. And wondering if you could describe a little bit of how Colorado has led in this area and where and how you see the opportunities for amplification from the investments that may be poised to come.
Thank you, Mara. And I don't know if Patrick's here somewhere, but thank you and CAP. Really appreciate this forum for sharing good ideas. We are really highlighting the clean energy transition in Colorado. So obviously there's some resources under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that we leaped into. We actually passed our own very forward-looking state infrastructure act, House Bill 260 in Colorado, including several clean energy enterprises with the express goal of making sure that we can improve access to charging and transit. We also used American Rescue Act funds to support transit, including, for instance, free fares last summer during our ozone season. We're doing that again this summer. It increased ridership across several different transit agencies. We also are now in our budget, and what we're working on with the legislature is a clean air tax credit package, particularly to be able to prepare ourselves for the maximum benefit when the Inflation Reduction Act elements kick in. So one piece around that is, of course, electric vehicles. I and several others have, of course, written around the most liberal possible interpretation of Made in America with regard to being able to deploy these tax credits. But in the meantime, they're not very deployable. As you know, it could be a couple of years until they are. We are going to temporarily increase, if it passes the legislature, our state EV tax credit, $2,000 to $5,000. The last thing we want is, of course, people to delay their decisions to buy an EV because they know larger tax credits are on the horizon. So not only, of course, do I urge the Biden administration to implement this with the maximum flexibility they have to deploy these tax credits, but again, I think it's smart for states to kind of fill some of that gap, as well as looking at forward technologies around clean hydrogen, around geothermal electric. We're obviously very excited to be working with a consortium of Western states around a hydrogen hub. We were accepted through the first stage of the proposal and are preparing our application now.
Thanks, Governor. I'm wondering if you might unpack for us a little bit more on electric vehicles, because I think it's really important for folks to understand in terms of great, big, impressive legislation, but sometimes some steps along the way to make it work better.
First, on the importance of electric vehicles. So, many states, and we're making enormous progress with our grid and a cleaner grid. We're going to be 80% renewable by the end of 29. We'll close our last coal plant in 29. So that is, of course, just 6-7 years out. Our goal is that we want to be 100% grid clean by 2040. That's the next 10 years. But really, where the big gains are to be had, since we're already locked in with all of our municipal utilities, electric co-ops, and investor-owned co-ops, the renewable grid is transportation. And so, how do we move to more efficiency? And of course, EVs are the single biggest part of that. We're doing transit. We're pursuing rail, front range rail. But the single biggest piece will be as consumers adopt electric vehicles. 13% of vehicles sold in Colorado at the end of last year were electric vehicles already. I think that's a little across the country. It's, 7-8%. But we want to be in the forefront of not only making sure that electric vehicles can access our market, but also that we have the charging and infrastructure in place to make them a success, and that we are able to promote affordability through tax credits and other mechanisms.
Thanks. Let me take a slightly different tack on the energy opportunities. You've also been a leader on a skills-based workforce and skills-based hiring. Curious about what you see in terms of strategies that can help to build a clean energy workforce that also maximizes what you're already doing in the state through apprenticeships and intentional recruitment and other means.
Yeah, this goes across all sectors. The movement, we've eliminated formal requirements for most state positions through executive order. Many private sector employers are doing the same. There's some that have done it from the start, like Google, which has a strong presence in Colorado. Obviously, don't care this degree or that degree. They care if you can code. But it also has applications in the clean energy sector, without a doubt. And so as we look to expand that workforce, everything from solar and wind to EV, there's skills that are don't require 4 years in college or even necessarily a full associate's degree, but there's skills that can be learned either through an apprenticeship on site or through intensive learning in a classroom. And we want to make sure that we're able to prepare Colorado's workforce for that clean energy future, including the just transition, which means making sure the workers who've worked in traditional legacy fuels, coal-powered plants, as well as coal mining. We established an Office of Just Transition with specific resources around retraining and reskilling workers from the legacy industries around new economic opportunities that exist.
What do you think the federal government can learn from how you have launched these efforts in Colorado, or what things can the federal government be doing to maximize what you're trying to do?
I definitely support national efforts around a just transition, meaning making sure that workers are not left behind, making sure that we can reskill and upskill workers from traditional fossil fuel sectors to have opportunities in new and emerging energy sectors. It's not like energy is here to stay. There's many good new jobs in energy. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if more people work in energy in 5 or 10 or 15 years. But the jobs are different and the skills are different, and we need to make sure that we bring people along and that we can support people's livelihoods in the clean energy future.
Thank you. You've led a plan to move Colorado to 100% clean electricity. There's a theme here, a number of things that you've led, and particularly in the energy space. We know that the legislation that has moved through and is being implemented is meant to able to support 30% or more of the cost of new clean electricity sources, and ensure, as you're talking about, they're built by workers who receive good pay. But how will this what difference would this kind of federal support, federal financial support, make in terms of helping Colorado reach the goals that you've already set for yourself?
Well, you know, we appreciate any help the federal government can provide, and we also appreciate state-based innovation and models that are in other states. Like the rest of the country, our utility customers, our ratepayers, basically all of our residents, have seen huge increases because of the increase in national natural gas prices. So we've really used this to double down on how we can end our reliance on costly natural gas. Not only has it led to increased prices this winter, but Colorado and a number of other Western states were severely impacted by the Texas storm, not even a storm in our state, of 2021, that led to temporary spikes in the natural gas market and surcharges to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars in our state, billions of dollars in other states, to be passed along to ratepayers over the following year or two. So the sooner we can end our reliance on costly natural gas, the sooner we can pass savings along to consumers.
So water, can I talk to you about that a little bit? It's hard to talk about electricity without talking about water, and for a variety of other reasons. I will say Governor Moore earlier today talked about traveling out to Western Maryland, which I realize is not the same thing as in the West, but with severe water issues. So there are challenges that are not limited to Colorado and the Western states, but we know that water is really critical to the future of Colorado. And your future is tied to it as a state. Can you talk a little bit about actions you're taking to protect the resource and the implications of the potential federal investments in the water area for you?
Sure. So obviously a direct nexus between water and energy is hydropower, not likely to be a large part of our mix because of our lack of water, but nationally there's other areas that are looking towards increased hydro as part of their renewable energy mix. Certainly we are maximizing the amount of resources we can pull down under the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act for water. One of the ways we're doing that is a lot of the projects initiate are from the water basin level. They're not like they're state projects. They're water basin, they're regional projects. And we are providing with our state budget some flexible matching resources because many of these basins and districts don't have the ability, they're not entities that have tax revenue in and of themselves. So we want to help them get the matching revenues they need to pull down federal grant dollars, specifically about $100 million in our budget for water, which we feel will be leveraged into several hundred million thanks to this once in a generation opportunity. And that's everything from storage to more efficient transportation of water. We've already deployed resources around best practices in ag and soil health. And of course, now we're looking at, in our state, the nexus between water usage and land planning and land use. And how can we make sure we live in a more sustainable way with more affordable, lower cost homes for rent and purchase, close to transit, close to where jobs are, rather than further out with exurban sprawl leading to less water efficiency.
Thank you. And I know I'm getting the signal that we're very close here to questions from the audience. I have one last question for you, Governor, before we go to our audience questions. And that is, and appreciating that you're on the Hill, you're talking to folks in the executive branch, so you're probably having these conversations all the time, but what can you tell us in this room about the top 2 or 3, top 1 element of what you think is most important for our government to do at the federal level to make these investments work for you?
I would just say, look, Inflation Reduction Act, Infrastructure Act, just be as flexible as you can with the federal guidelines. We talked a little bit about EVs and Made in America, but with regard to every program, make sure you could show the maximum flexibility allowed under statute to make sure it works in the real world. Because we know Congress writes words on a page. I was in Congress for a time. They're unlikely to change those words in the page, given the composition of Congress. So use your executive authority to make these investments work in the real world. And that means working with states and governors, in the case of the CHIPS Act, with the private sector, to really make sure that these words on a page can come to life by using the most expansive interpretation of law where appropriate to be able to get the resources out to make a positive difference.
That's extraordinarily helpful for us. Thank you.
I have a question from online. You talked about your 100% clean energy plan and the importance of EVs and transit. How have new federal investments under IRA set you up for success in other sectors too, including electrifying buildings and investing in new clean energy manufacturing?
Yeah, certainly not those to the exclusion of everything else. Obviously, the grid and cars are a big part of it, but buildings are a big part of it. We are absolutely looking at particularly tapping into Inflation Reduction Act resources, grid resiliency, interconnectivity. There's a number of competitive areas for funds under those areas. So a lot of these haven't hit yet, which is why we can't talk about the effect. These are funds that are passed under Inflation Reduction Act, guidance pending, coming out soon. Grant processes coming out soon, but all I can say is we're very excited, and we're really looking at a cross-government approach with our different agencies to make sure that we're competitive with the very best proposals to achieve the desired clean energy outcomes.
Governor, so much appreciate your time. Appreciate your fitting us into your schedule. So thank you, and thank you for all the work you're doing. And I invite everyone to give a warm thanks to Governor Polis.
I think we can take one more from the audience if you.
I think he gave us the.
No, one more?
I
Good.
think he was dropping.
Thank you all. Great to see you, Cap. Thank you, Governor.
Please welcome to the stage Mayor Muriel Bowser of Washington, D.C., Mayor LeVar Stoney of Richmond, Virginia, and Daniela Gibbs-Leger, Executive Vice President for Communications and Strategy at the Center for American Progress.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon, and thank you to Mayor Stoney and Bowser for joining us today. I am excited to have this conversation with you all because, as we know, cities have a vital role to play in the implementation of the federal dollars coming from these historic bills that we've been talking about today. And not only that, cities like DC and Richmond in particular face unique challenges in equitable implementation of money and resources. So safe to say, we have a lot to cover, so let's just get right to it. As we begin 2023, I would like you to think about what you view as the biggest economic challenges facing your city. Small question. And what are the biggest opportunities? Localities have received historic investments from the American Rescue Plan and will serve as key partners in implementing federal investments from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. So can you speak to the unique challenges that cities currently face and how you think these pieces of legislation are best suited to meet them? And home court advantage goes to you, Mayor Bowser.
Well, thank you. And thanks for inviting me today. And we always appreciate this summit and that it's in Washington, D.C. So please continue to support our businesses. I think that the biggest economic challenge, I would say two things. And one that I am very focused on is how to bring our economy all the way back post-COVID. We're strong in many ways in that a lot of our tourism dollars have come back. Our hotels and restaurants have rebounded. We're still looking for our business traveler. And we need our downtown vibrant and productive with workers. So I would say our big focus is on this post-COVID new way of work and what that means for a capital city that was built on L'Enfant's plan. With wide avenues and huge, majestic federal buildings that are good for about one thing. And that is making us one of the most beautiful and unique cities in the world, but also it puts a lot of space in our downtown that our federal government uses. So we're focused on that. The second thing I would say is how do we close wealth gaps? We are a city, and I say frequently that we're a prosperous city, and that's true. And that has allowed us to make huge investments in our social services. But we want to close wealth gaps between our mostly Native African American residents and their white counterparts. And we're focused on a few programs to do that, especially home ownership. I've set the goal to raise our median household income for Black families by $25,000 in the next 5 years and attract more residents at the same time. So those are our big issues.
Great. Mayor Stoney?
First, Mayor Bowser, it's great to be back in your beautiful city once again. I feel like I'm here every week. So I'm doing my part and
Thank you, Mayor Stoney.
putting my dollars into the coffers of the district's general fund. But not too different than what's going on in Washington, just 100 miles south in Richmond, the capital of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I know what's on the minds of all of our residents right now. And there's three things post-COVID-19, post the pandemic. Number one, housing. There's a housing crisis in all of our cities across this country, but also in rural and suburban areas as well. Number two, public safety. Folks want to feel safe when they step out into their neighborhoods, when they're sending their kids to school. So it's a priority of ours. And number three, priority for me is our children and our families right now. And so I think that these signature pieces of legislation passed here at the federal level have helped us sort of target these three main issues right here. So when I talk about housing, it was the American Rescue Plan. We used $20 million of the American Rescue Plan to focus on housing. So we normally have affordable housing trust fund. I said, let's bypass that this time around. Let's make the $10 million available for $20 million available for developers to get more housing, to build more housing in the city of Richmond. So we were to put $10 million on the street last year. We're doing $10 million again this year, but I'm taking $2 million of that focused on home ownership. This is a compliment to all mayors when you steal ideas. So I saw what Mayor Bowser was doing here in Washington, and I said, well, that is an ambitious goal to get new homeowners, low-income homeowners in the district. And so I said, what can we do in Richmond? So we created a goal of putting 2,000 new homeowners into homes, low-income homeowners by 2026, using the American Rescue Plan Act. But also we want to focus on our children and families. And so we did feedback a public engagement process throughout the city on how we were going to spend $155 million we were received from the federal government. We decided that we're going to use 78 million of it, roughly half, focused on children and families, focused on new community centers in Black and brown neighborhoods that were redlined, and these places never had community centers. We're also going to focus on expanding childcare as well. We created 250 new seats for early childhood education and preschool seats for our kids. And when it comes to just infrastructure, Richmond's a historic city, but as you know, highways sort of damage that community fabric in many of our cities. We saw the Harlem of the South in Jackson Ward, one of our historic Black neighborhoods, that was basically bisected by I-95. And so what we are pitching to the federal government at the moment is trying to recreate those connections by building a bridge, a cap across I-95, so we can actually connect both parts of that neighborhood. One part of this neighborhood is public housing right now. The other part is you could say an emerging gentrified neighborhood. How do we get that sort of success and growth on the other side of I-95? And so we believe these three pieces of legislation will be helpful to get us to our goals.
So I want to talk about the importance of getting dollars directly from the federal government. In Virginia, obviously you have a Republican governor, legislature is half controlled by Republicans. You want to say something, don't you?
Well, I'm ready to answer the question.
Okay. And, DC has its unique relationships, I would say, with the federal government. So can you talk about both the importance of being able to get money directly from the federal government to cities, but also any challenges that you might be facing because of these unique relationships?
Well, I will say when the CARES Act dollars first dropped during the height of the pandemic, I was hotter than fish grease because those dollars went directly to cities that population is 500,000 and above. And normally, we all don't want to have to deal with state government to get programs or dollars into programs that are going to save lives or lift people up. But lucky enough, I had a Democratic governor at the time. Then we had an election, things have totally changed. So when the American Rescue Plan Act came on the scene, we fought using our friendship, our relationships with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I'm the president of the Democratic Mayors Association. I said, how do we get dollars directly to cities, no matter the size, right? And I'll have to say, we were able to get that in ARPA, and it gives us the flexibility to innovate and be creative. Because at the end of the day, it's cities and mayors who are the front lines. We got our cities through the pandemic. We know about the inequities because they were illuminated during the pandemic. And I think we should be the ones that should be given the flexibility to create the programs that are going to lift our residents up and sort of tackle the issues, the problems. And so I'm grateful that we were able to get that function into the American Rescue Plan Act. And moving forward, it's my hope that they take a page out of President Biden's book and ensure that empower local governments to make these decisions. This is the largest investment in local government since the Great Society. And I think we're going to see great results and accomplishments for years and years to come.
I couldn't agree with the mayor more. And I think that the president deserves a lot of credit for making sure that the legislation nobody wants to say they're bypassing governors, but that's the legislatures for sure, but the governors as well. And so getting the money directly to cities, I know was important for our conference. Now we are different. As you know, we are city, county, state, all in one. And we lack any votes in the Congress. So that makes us different. Now, when it comes to getting state funding, it's good for us because we get the state funding. We were in a weird thing in the last administration, carved out of CARES. We fought for maybe a year and a half, and President Biden and Speaker Pelosi were very instrumental in making sure we got those CARES dollars. But it is key for cities to be able to implement in a way that's frequently doesn't get into the partisanship that sometimes you have on the state level. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's so key that mayors can say, look, this is, I know what the problem is. I spoke to my constituent about it in the grocery store, and I'm working with my agencies to implement it. In DC, and it's probably similar in Richmond, we can really go from an idea through a budget cycle to implementation in a year. You don't have that on the state level with the kind of the fighting among very disparate interests about how to spend money. And so that's why I think, and I don't know how big your council is, mine is 13. So between the 14 of us, we can really make some decisions about what works. Now, one thing I encouraged the administration to do was also think about procurement policies. Because when we're talking about all of this money, and it's great to have a lot of money, what's not great is not being able to spend it. And so as we think about policies that help us get dollars out the door, we should always think about innovative procurement policy as well.
And Danielle, can I add as well that because Mayor Bowser is absolutely correct. How can we expect someone who lives in the countryside of Virginia, in far reaches of Southwest Virginia, and or in the Valley, to know what are the issues that are on the minds of residents in the city of Richmond or any urban locale? And so giving us that creativity, that ability to make these decisions has gone a long way. And I wouldn't want to make decisions for those who live in rural parts of my state as well, if I'm the mayor of the city of Richmond.
So both of you have spoken about how new federal resources can help expand broadband in your cities, especially in underserved communities where internet access can be a major issue. Now, I think when people generally talk about expanding internet access, they think about rural areas. And obviously that is a misperception that it only affects those areas. So can you talk about why this investment is transformative in your cities and the effects it would have on people's lives?
I think for us, and it is a pillar in how we will deploy the infrastructure dollars. I impaneled a task force. We called it the Build Back Better Task Force. Former Secretary Rodney Slater was one of our co-chairs. We had several committees to help us think about what we wanted to go after in the competitive grants. How we would involve our businesses and our residents so that we were also using this dollars to promote our other goals. How are we building more Black homeowners and raising the wages for and the wealth of Native Washingtonians? So we were very focused on all of those issues. And I think what we have determined with broadband in this pandemic was a huge education for us in access. We think most people have high-speed internet where they live, but they may not always have the access points, whether it's the device or the service plan to connect to it. So we have challenged ourselves to look at our own networks that connect our schools and libraries to see if we can even help with free access around those buildings or maybe even into homes. So that's part of it. We have also initiatives around our public housing to make sure that we're getting more, if they don't already have high-speed internet, the access to tap into it and the devices. So we have to continue to think about ways to make sure all of our communities are connected, because we're relatively small in geographic area, but we still have too many people who have trouble tapping in.
Very similar, in Richmond, a city of 230,000 people, roughly 45,000 do not have strong access to the internet. 5,000 don't have computers in their homes. So when 2020 came around, March of 2020, and all our children had to move into remote learning. And most of my students who go to our school district, 90% of them are Black and brown. It became very difficult for them to actually be educated from all the computers that we were able to allocate dollars in the budget for them to take home, Chromebooks. But if you can't get on the internet from your unit in public housing, I think we're setting them up to fail. And so what I've done using, knowing that those dollars are out there, I've directed my Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Operations and Infrastructures to start to explore what are the barriers for some of our residents who are living in public housing, who are living in census tracts that are below the poverty line, and also our connectivity around the city as well, looking at public spaces as well. No child should have to go to a McDonald's or Chick-fil-A to get access to free access to the internet. And so how do we sort of light up the whole city in terms of connectivity to the internet, to Wi-Fi? And for us, unfortunately, this follows the same sort of, the footprint is the same footprint that you see in housing as well. If you were a red line neighborhood from a generation ago, you were likely to have a weak access to weak connectivity to the internet.
I want to talk about transportation, which is something that's been a through line for the conversations today. The IRA has, major new incentives to help people afford new and used electric vehicles, rooftop solar, new electric air conditioning and heating, and more. What's great about this is that many of these incentives are structured as upfront rebates, so they'll be able, be available in many cases as homeowners and renters right away. But how can the federal government be a good partner to the city and ensure that these benefits are affordable and accessible for all families? Specifically, communities of color historically have not used these resources, either due to a lack of access or other reasons. So how will you work to change that in the city with the new resources coming in?
Well, I think I always say this, and I think it's true. Black and brown residents want exactly what white residents want too. Right? They want safe neighborhoods. They want access. And sometimes you just have to say it straight up. And so we would utilize these appliances, these goods, sometimes if we know where to go. And I think that's where the federal government can, I think, step up right here. Where do you go to get access to this? Right? We hear about it. Some people, if you read the newspaper, you may read about it. I can get this sort of discount on my washing machine or this sort of discount on my heating appliance. We know that it's in our neighborhoods where a lot of our residents are seeing rising rents. So housing costs are going up. And then the cost for energy as well. If you have a cost, you have some inefficiencies in your home, you're seeing those costs rise as well. So obviously this direct to customer strategy that the federal government is using, I think, is a positive. But if they don't know where to go to easily access it, that's a problem. That's a problem. So we have to sort of, I think that's the barrier that we have to fix. If the federal government can make it easier for them to find, it was a whole lot easier when you sent them a check and said, hey, it's in the mail, it's coming, right? We're not doing that with this. They have to actually go and to retrieve this. And so you have to sort of kind of in a more elementary way, lay out how you get access to these sort of incentives.
I was really considering what you said carefully, because one of the things that we are very focused on in DC, and we heard the president talk about it last night, is what we're doing to protect and grow the middle class in America. And one frustrating thing I find about a lot of government programs is they tend to be focused, especially when it comes to financial support, only on the lowest income residents. And then they'll say, well, nobody's taking it. But the gulf between how to get for somebody with a very low income to an electric vehicle may be really wide. Okay. And for some reason, we never focus on what we're doing for that middle income family. And I've got to say, I don't know about your city, but in our city, our middle income families are getting kicked. And when there are benefits and programs to be had, they're not for them. So I was knocking on doors one time recently, and a lady stopped me and she says, I'm an educator. I've done everything right. I'm a principal of an alternative school. I'm single. I don't have kids. And, I have my house, but what do you do for me? And I said, I hear you, I see you, I am you. And so part of what I talked about in my own inaugural remarks this past January is that as a city, when I look at the people who left DC during COVID, a lot of them were middle income folks, some of them young, most of them young, actually below 35, and they are shopping. Okay, they're shopping for places to live that support them. So a lot of our focus in DC is on growing and keeping the people in our middle class and making sure that we have ladders to the middle class for everyone. And these folks that I'm talking about are also likely adopters, aggressive adopters of all of the programs that you just mentioned. And so I think sometimes with these programs, they have to be designed, get the early aggressive, low hanging, all those terms you're used to, the low, get them. And you know what, who else to get? The kids. Get the kids, because then the kids are going to talk to the parents. This was the playbook we used for recycling and other things to get families educated about the benefits. And I even heard one recently about, switching, and I don't want to talk about stoves, but it was about stoves.
Why? Everybody else is talking about stoves, might as well.
But I heard like an argument that is getting promoted that I'd never really heard talked about a lot, and that was just the impact on asthmatic kids. It's like if you start talking about the impact on asthmatic kids, you have a whole nother group who's listening. So that's a long answer to say. I think a lot of these programs, the messaging around these programs, I know in our city would be a great benefit if we're talking about EV, if we're talking about solar, if we're talking about switching your appliances, that you're focused on that group. And it's like a package of great things that help you live in great places like DC.
So the IRA and the IIJA included formula and competitive grant funding opportunities for projects that improve walkability, safety, affordable transportation access. Now, the goal of this funding is to address the negative environmental and safety impacts from transportation infrastructure in disadvantaged communities. So how might these investments improve the planning and capacity building for projects in DC and in Richmond? And specifically in DC, will this funding help you reach your Vision Zero goal?
Yes, it will. And because we have looked at, I think, 120 intersections in DC. And I think all of us across the country recognize how shutting down your cities, taking cars off the road, I don't think we appreciated the recklessness that would follow when people did come back to the roads, and we're seeing it. We're seeing too many people driving. We need more people back on transit. And so we're dealing with all of that. And these dollars will help us advance planned work on making intersections more safe, for sure.
Yeah, we're doing the same work in the city of Richmond as well. But when I think of the infrastructure bill as well, I also think about some of the aging bridges we have in Richmond. Richmond's a very, very old city. We've invested in some new neighborhoods around the city, or they're not new, but people are living there now. And so people are living in places they weren't living in decades before, and using infrastructure in a different way than they used to use it. And so how do we upgrade the infrastructure in some of these neighborhoods? And also, how do we, using an equity lens, upgrade the infrastructure in some of these long forgotten, neglected Black and brown neighborhoods as well, where a lot of the working middle class live within the city? Folks sometimes, I think, don't recognize that when we talk about vehicular fatalities, things of that nature, sometimes there's a lot of those who are living in these neighborhoods who are either being, unfortunately, injured by car accidents, or those who are, unfortunately, they lose their lives because of these accidents.
Great. So I think we are coming up to audience questions. Okay, great. So I'm going to ask another question then. Both of your cities, to go back to the environment, have set goals to become carbon neutral in the next 20 to 25 years. And the Inflation Reduction Act has incentives to enable low income and disadvantaged communities to benefit from zero emissions technologies and other, GHG reduction activities that we talked about. So how will these financial supports help you reach your goals in ways that would benefit the health and energy costs in these communities most in need, but also kind of touching on what we talked about before, like how do you explain this in a way that people don't hear this and they say, are you going to increase my energy bills?
Because they want to know that, right? They want to know, is this going to make my electricity bill go up? I know this. I was raised by my grandmother. Everywhere we went, she told me to cut off the lights everywhere we went. And I said, Grandma, they're not charging us that much. And she'd be like, no, cut that off. So the house will be pitch black. That's just how we live.
Sounds like a Caribbean household too.
But that's how but right now, when we're thinking about cost on everything, right? From eggs to you name it, you have to tell them there's some sort of benefit for them in this, right? And I think that's where we need the federal government's help on sort of how do we explain that this is a benefit for you. You should weatherize your home, right? Because a lot of times we get, a lot of rejections when we say, well, we're trying to help can we come into your home to do X, Y, and Z? You're not coming in my house? Whoa. So there's a lot of cultural barriers out there that I think that sometimes when we put these policies in place, these ideas, folks like, oh yeah, they're obviously going to use it. And then you realize, oh, whoa, no one's going to allow you to just come up in their home and just do X, Y, and Z. So I think that's where we need the federal government to meet our residents where they are.
I also think it matters who the messenger is. And I think just as a country and as an environmental movement, we just have a lot of work to do. We just have to be candid with it. And I think too frequently people feel judged or talked down to, or they feel like they're being asked to do things they can't afford. So we have to do better. I mean, I just don't know another way to say it, because people, to Mayor Stoney's point, they want to be healthy. They want to help the environment. If there are things that they could do that's going to, make it cleaner or better in the city and have their children be healthier, they will choose it. But I do think it matters who's delivering that message, and we have to work harder about recruiting more Black people to talk about the environment. And we have to do it. It matters.
And can I say as well that I think when you're married, we have to have a healthy understanding of nuance, and nuance matters. And I think right now we live in a world where people don't care about nuance anymore. It's like you're either this or either you're that. It's an either or. We need to be able to message the both and to our communities, because they know they live in a world of both ands or in a gray area, but we make everything so absolute. Once again, flexibility.
So my final question before we go to the audience. So as you think about implementing all of this great stuff over the next 2 years, what is your biggest ask of the federal government? What is the thing you need the most to help you achieve these goals?
Well, I think President Biden spoke about this last night, and that is we got to finish the job, right? There's always a lot of uncertainty coming out of Washington down into the states, into the cities, because, some people hesitate to sign up for a program or participate in a program because they think in a matter of 2 years, because of a change in leadership in the House of Representatives, that this program may not be there any longer. And so I think we have to finish the job and give confidence to leaders at the local level and the state level that this program is going to be here to last. I think we look at the American Rescue Plan. We heard folks start talking about clawing back those dollars. You're like, wait a minute. I just went to neighborhoods in my city and sold the American Rescue Plan to them and asked them how they want to see this implemented in their city. And you're talking about clawing back dollars because you gave us till 2026 to encumber these expenses. Folks they once again, they see inconsistency and us talking out one side of, the other side of our necks. They don't want to see that. So what we need is not just President Biden, We need those in the legislature as well to commit to finishing the job.
Not to sound like a broken record, but we need national leadership in this post-COVID return to work environment. And I'm not just talking about our city now, I'm talking about cities around America that are, we have to be concerned about our downtowns. And let's just put a point on what that means. That means a lot of the programs and services that we're so proud of in DC are in jeopardy because decreased revenues means decreased investments in those things that have made us a great city. The transformation of our schools, the investments in public safety, our ability to have the gold standard in homeless services. All are a result of what we've been able to do in a robust downtown. So I think that is vitally important and is a signal to the private sector for cities that don't have a lot of federal workers. They have a lot of people who work with federal workers. So it is impacting that discussion too. And it is also not a black and white issue. It is not an issue that says, let's go back to 2019, because obviously we're not. But I think the key questions about American productivity and vibrancy is going to be key. So I continue to think that's one of the biggest things. I think the federal government also has a role to play in the conversation on public safety. You've heard the president speak, and I think for a lot of mayors in talking about what we need to do to support good policing in our communities. But there's the other side of the equation that's not enforcement. It's also about opportunity. How are we making sure that we're creating great opportunities that disrupt cycles of violence in communities? So that includes how people who need a second chance are able to get employment. Or are there other tax or business incentives that we can work with the private sector on to do exactly that? And then the last thing I'll mention is housing. You heard Mayor Stoney already talk about housing as being key. But when I think about areas like we're in the Mid-Atlantic and the mayor is in the Commonwealth, but our cities, to stay competitive, we have to be housing competitive with other regions, or we're going to see, the great migration from the south to the north. We're starting to see it go the other way, where people may find more affordable housing. Now, they can't compete with our great city, our arts and culture, our proximity on the East Coast, our sports capital and all that.
Sounds like Richmond.
Yes. But this housing, and there is a role for the federal government, especially in the public housing space.
Great.
We have a question from our online audience. Are you considering green banks to help get clean energy options direct to customers and others? And what do you need from the investment community to help advance your goals for your communities?
Well, I created a green bank probably about 5 years ago. So we have some but limited experience with the green bank. And I think we're primarily working with commercial interests. So I would want to look in to see how we can work directly with individuals.
We are just in the beginning stages of our attempt to be to go, zero emissions come 2050. So we're not there yet, but I would love to see some information on it.
We have another question. How are you selling the opportunities and investments in your respective cities to both potential residents and to keep your long-term residents?
I'm thinking about that all the time. So how am I selling key investments? Well, we are, as I mentioned earlier, we set a goal of new residents in our downtown, 15,000 people. We have to create a better balance between workers and residents, and we're focused on that. And we want to grow our overall population by 25,000 people. So how do we do that? We keep the residents that we have, as I mentioned, and part of our big focus, as I also mentioned, is on that middle income family who we may have lost during COVID, but who we are looking to get back. I just left a meeting with seniors in DC to talk about our budget. And one of the best compliments that one of them paid was, you know, I stayed in DC when a lot of my friends were moving out to the suburbs in the 70s and 80s. And they have no amenities like we have in DC for seniors. And now they're all trying to come back. And so we continue to sell our city for what we are. You know, we're for young people, they come here to change the world. They get jobs, they focus on policy, and they're excited to be working to make the world better. So that's who they are. But we also know that we are great for tech. We're best in the country for women in tech, and we pour into that as well. So what we offer is a great place to live, good paying jobs, great schools, and we're going to grow with the things that make us unique and good.
And I'll just add that Richmond is growing. Over the last, I've been mayor for the last 6 years. This is my 7th year in office. Over the course of the last decade, we have seen a 45% increase in residents who live in our downtown. The city is growing, the region is growing. We're seeing more and more people move out of the Northern Virginia area. Some of you all live in Northern Virginia. They're going to places like DC, or they're going to Richmond as well. And so I'm going to make the pitch here is that as we grow, we have to be very intentional about our growth, and we have to do it with an equity lens. That means growing, if we're going to grow and more people are going to move in, how do we ensure that our native residents they can survive and stay in the city for another generation? Because what comes with growth, unfortunately, is displacement. And so the ability to build more housing, create a bigger supply, a larger supply, will allow for us to keep costs down, but also we have to add some intentional policies there so we can keep Miss Jackie in her home who's lived there for 30 years.
Great. Well, with that, I want to thank you both so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation. Just a personal note, I just moved and I stayed in DC, so you're welcome, Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Please stick around for our next conversation.
Question. For these next 2 sessions, what's the method for submitting questions from the audience?
Cards on the table.
Cards on the table.
Yeah. And so folks will come around the platform.
Okay, so you write the question.
Please welcome to the stage Governor Kathy Hochul of New York and Patrick Gaspard, President and CEO of the Center for American Progress.
Any New Yorkers here? A lot of enthusiasm.
Yeah, that's right. Y'all can do a little better than that for our New York governor.
One thing we're not going to talk about is our favorite New York State football teams, okay? Don't go there. It's been a rough year for all of us, okay? But there's always next year.
You know, I'm a Jets fan and you're a Buffalo fan, so we have, a little bit of. That's right. That's right. Well, Governor, you got the voice of God introduction, which robbed me of my opportunity to kind of brag on you just a little bit. I want to congratulate you for breaking the ultimate glass ceiling in New York State with your recent historic election. It's phenomenal. You have a rich history of public service and doing extraordinary work on the front lines of immigration reform and healthcare expansion and even public finance reform of our elections. And you have been a phenomenal leader on paid family leave. So we thank you for all of that. And I'm so excited to be in conversation with you today.
Looking forward to it very much. So thank you for the invitation. And since my days in Congress, we always followed what the Center for American Progress recommended. That was pretty much our talking points during our caucus meeting. So thank you for all you do for to move progress forward in our country.
We did not pay the governor for that advertisement. So thank you, Madam Governor. We are celebrating the 20th anniversary of CAP this year, and we're launching with this event. And far better than anyone that one does not make progress without working extraordinarily hard. But you get there by first being in the arena. And I know that over your desk, you have repurposed the Theodore Roosevelt "man in the arena" quote to be the.
I have the woman in the arena
That's right.
poster. So if anybody wants to get it, I have it in my office. It's an inspiration for me because, as Teddy Roosevelt said with that extraordinary speech, our business is not for the faint of heart. You have to be willing to be in the arena, sometimes get bloodied and marred and beat up a little bit, but it's far better than being those timid souls on the side, the critics on the side who don't know the glories and the great enthusiasms of being in the arena, the wins and losses. So that is something that inspires me every day.
Thank you, Governor, and many, many more wins to come. And on that front, speaking of being bloodied but unbowed and being able to emerge renewed, we all know, of course, that New York went through extraordinary challenge through pandemic. It was at the heart of the storm and the early part and at the apex of the pandemic. In your State of the State address, you talked about all the things that are happening to help rebound and get to the other side of recovery. I wonder if you could help us all understand what specifically from President Biden's agenda with the infrastructure bill, with the Inflation Reduction Act are contributing to pandemic recovery in New York State.
What can you not love about President Biden's plan? I mean, it's extraordinary. And when you talk about how bad it was during the pandemic, just remember it was the pandemic under President Donald Trump. So that's about as bad as it gets, everybody. So we're having to fight the deniers and people, absorbing the idea that vaccines were not a good idea for them. So we had a lot of headwinds to overcome, and even in our state. But what President Biden has delivered, and we're so blessed to have Majority Leader Schumer from our state and Leader Hakeem Jeffries. So we have it all. And when they send money to us for childcare, for example, we still have mothers who could not keep their jobs during the pandemic because I'm a mom, first mom governor of New York. I know that most of the responsibility tends to fall on the women in the household. Not fair, statement of fact, though. So money from these initiatives at the federal level helped us be able to get more moms back to work by supporting childcare. The jobs, we've had a recovery. I've been governor of the state of New York for a year and a half. 536,000 new jobs in that time. So the jobs are starting to come back with the money that we've been using from the federal dollars to create those jobs. And even something like reemerging into new industries, the Federal CHIPS Act to bring semiconductor manufacturing back from China, back from Asia to the place it was all started. We've been able to leverage that and have our own version of a green chips bill, which resulted in 50,000 new jobs coming from Micron alone in upstate New York. So we've been absolutely joined at the hips with our federal partners, President Biden, our leadership, to bring the infrastructure spending, the climate money, the childcare money, and money to build resiliency because of climate change. All of it is being spent in New York State very happily by this governor.
That's phenomenal, Governor. I'm gonna ask you to just pull on that last thread a little bit more, if you would. The Micron investment through the CHIPS Act was extraordinary, 50,000 jobs, as you said. But I want everyone to understand that the governor comes from a part of New York that has been long neglected by state leaders, by federal leaders, place that used to be a vibrant industrial hub that we're now trying to, get back as the center of the industrial universe. I want you to, if you could, talk about the Micron investment, talk about infrastructure in those neglected towns and communities, but if you would do it, not from a place of policy, but from a place kind of under the skin, because you know these communities well, and you are a phenomenal storyteller, and we are lacking in real storytelling around economic inclusion. Kind of ground us in those communities, if you would.
No, I
Governor.
appreciate the opportunity. This is deeply personal to me, deeply personal, because I'm the first governor of New York from Buffalo since Grover Cleveland. So we don't get a lot of representation outside the city of New York in our state capitals. So that's kind of new for people to adapt to in our state. An upstater who's also a woman. Oh my God, what's happening here? But for me to be able to bring manufacturing jobs back to an area that when I was growing up, Grandpa, my dad, my uncles all worked making steel. They were steel workers, part of the union, lifted our family out of poverty. My parents used to live in a trailer park. Well, my dad was able to get a degree. So I was able to see the transition from my family's own story, from tough circumstances to be able to live what we call the New York dream, which is even better than the American dream, be able to live that because of those good jobs. And all of a sudden, in 1982, all those jobs are gone. 20,000 jobs gone overseas like that. Everybody in my family, all my neighbors, all my friends' families lost their jobs. And I grew up from a big Irish Catholic family. Everybody wanted to stay in New York. I was the only one left because I was in public service. My family all had to leave. So to be able to be the governor and say, guess what? We no longer have to say last one out of upstate New York, turn out the lights, which is what it was growing up. There are finally jobs and workforce development opportunities, good union jobs. Micron was heading out the door to Texas. They told me, well, it's too expensive to build in New York and labor, this and that. I said, what if I bring labor to the table, you sit down and you work it out and I'll make sure it happens. That's exactly how we took it from Texas. And I'll tell you, anytime we can beat Texas, whether it's in football or in driving, I'm happy to beat Texas. Sorry about that. I'm a little competitive. So for me, it was a sign that 50 years of living in decline, it's finally turned around. And so the new kids, the younger people today won't have to leave to go to other states in search of jobs. They can come right here to New York. So this could not be more personal to me. And I'm grateful to Chuck Schumer, our president, and everybody who made that CHIPS bill happen, because this is not just a nice talking point, the largest investment in our country, largest investment in our nation's history at this time, $100 billion coming to New York State and taking the money back from China. So I'll go to my grave knowing that this was a turning point in the trajectory of our state, and it's long overdue.
I think that's what Joe Biden would call a BFD. And I'm sure there were no Dallas Cowboys harmed in the process. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Governor Hochul is a pretty impressive trifecta. I would imagine that with the three of you, and I know that you're incredibly competitive. It must be really hard for neighboring states now to be able to draw industry away from New York. You have a recent announcement: Tesla, Alstom, the Corning glass factory had recent investments as well, and IBM is investing tens of billions in semiconductor manufacturing of their high-tech jobs in the state. I wonder how the legislation that we passed last year, how it changes the pitch, the exact pitch that you're making to these companies to get them to double down the way that Micron did. What's the business end of this, Governor?
Well, like you said at the outset, I would not want to be one of my neighbors. Listen, I'm not going to bet against any other state. I want them all to be successful. And that's why when the president talks about making it in America, that our supply chain is right here in America, that's what we're doing every day. And I won't keep pounding on Micron, except the fact that I have places like Batavia, New York, little tiny Batavia, population 50,000. It's the biggest metropolitan area in that part of our state. I used to represent in Congress. I just was able to deliver 600 jobs to Batavia because it's a company out of Great Britain that makes electric pumps that they're going to use for making semiconductors. So the ecosystem has already started. So what we talk about, the connection of what happens at the federal level, helps me leverage our opportunities, because people always said, well, New York State, you're tax and spend, you're not business friendly. I said, we will be the most labor friendly and the most business-friendly state in the nation because they can go together. Businesses want the best talent. I can offer the best talent. You come to New York State with that heritage, that legacy of hard work and great education and this willingness to just join a company and be a company person, but just pay them well. Give them paid family leave. Make sure there's childcare. Take care of your employees, and they'll be the hardest working people in this country. That's the pitch I make with using workforce development money from the federal government, childcare dollars, infrastructure dollars. Everything that we're doing is a pass-through in one sense from the federal government, which I'm so grateful for under the leadership we have now. But when that leadership wasn't there, it was dry times for New York. We had to struggle on our own. So I'm not taking for granted the support we're getting from President Biden and our leaders in Washington, who are the Democrats, that's helping us have this resurgence, this rebirth of New York State, where businesses, when I call them in other states now, they say, we're coming. And that was never the case when I was growing up. That is brand new.
That's awesome. You know, Governor, one of the things that we most admire about you is that you're not the type to paper over some of the difficult things. And in your state of the state and conversations that you have, you speak really directly about one of the most significant crises that we're faced with, not just in New York, but across the country, which is the crisis of affordability for folks who are looking for homes that they can buy or rent. And I wonder how the investments that we're getting now from the federal government begins to change the equation in how you're thinking about state policy on housing specifically. You have an ambitious plan. It's going to be hard to execute. Would love to hear the details.
We do have a crisis in affordability overall, but housing being the biggest driver of that. Like I said, when I was growing up in upstate New York, you didn't worry about the cost of housing. That wasn't that long ago. You get a house for $87,000 in Buffalo because there was no one else in competition for that house. It was probably a vacant house. And right now, people want to be in our cities and our small towns. It was rediscovered during the pandemic. People wanted to say, now let me see what the rest of New York State has to offer. But the challenge is we have had the most restrictive zoning in the country. Restrictive zoning is what's keeping people out of all income levels and stopping the opportunities for so many other people to have the great quality of life we have here in New York. So what you have in places like Long Island, wonderful place to live, incredible beaches, great educational institutions, higher education, a lot of technology, bio life sciences. Employers are telling me, I can get the talent here, but the talent can't afford to live here. Now, a place like Long Island, love Long Island, 0.5% growth in housing over the last decade, 0.5%. Now we're in competition with suburban New Jersey and Connecticut and Philadelphia, where the housing has been built over the last decade. So I've got to make up for lost time. 800,000 units I need to build like this and make sure that we're being creative, pushing our suburban areas to build more. And I've got got an aggressive plan. You can read it. I don't want to give all the details. We're not making a ton of friends on this, but I have to win over the hearts and minds because we have an urgent situation. But even in the city of New York, affordability. If I want to attract young families to come here and they say, I'd love to, I've got a job waiting for me, but I can't afford a place to live, then we're failing. So I'm approaching this with an aggressive style, put out a very ambitious plan in our legislature, and the federal government is helping us at many levels of that. But failure is not an option in that space. And I believe we can unleash the full potential of New York once we can start driving down the cost of living in the state because people want to be there.
Agreed. That's bold, Governor. One of the things that we're determined to do at CAP always is to cross-pollinate some of the best policy solutions that there are. But in addition to policy solutions, sometimes we need solutions for our administrative bureaucracy in our states. In your housing plan, you have this pretty aggressive mandate that cities really need to be able to develop the housing within a 3-year fast-track process. I wonder how you can help unpack for us the plumbing behind that, how your administration, how your various agencies provide both the support, the carrot and the stick behind that, and what you're doing to make certain that the most vulnerable residents of the state, those who have traditionally been left behind, are part of that journey.
First of all, we start with putting money on the table. $25 billion to build 100,000 affordable housing units, full stop. No other state in the nation has put that kind of money on the table, but I believe that's an investment in our people, especially people that have been struggling. who just need to have that opportunity to live in good, safe, decent housing. It's a basic human right, as well as making sure that we have market rate housing and investing in so many different levels. So how are we doing this? I'm telling every community in the state of New York, if you're in upstate, you have to grow your housing stock by 1% over the next 3 years. You have to. And if there are projects, whether they're mixed use, affordable housing, transit-oriented development, which I'm leaning very hard into. We have a lot of great train stations. A lot of communities are serviced by our entire metro system in New York City, in the New York City region. Those areas lend themselves perfectly, but if they do not accept a project that is meritorious because they just want to have exclusionary zoning, I have a fast track appeal through the state of New York that we're establishing. You can come to us, developer, and as long as it meets environmental standards and quality of life standards and other benchmarks we're going to have, then we're going to approve it for you. And the communities that say, well, we can't afford the sewers and the roads and the schools that go along with growth, said, I've got you there too. I put $250 million to start in a fund that'll help defray those costs. I spent 14 years as a local government official. I did zoning. I did housing projects. I know exactly all the ways people can say no, but I also know that they can get to yes. And I'm going to use that knowledge in my relationships with a lot of enlightened mayors and help them persuade the other mayors who are still stuck in the years past, who think that their future can still be no growth is a path forward, and they're just wrong. And it's also that their own kids and grandkids can't live in the community they were raised in. And that's the challenge for all. I just have to point it out at a human level. You know, how sad. I'm a new grandma. My grandbaby lives in Washington, so invite me anytime. I'll come back and down and see her. But I understand that deep family connection because I didn't have kids growing up around grandparents because there are no jobs. Everybody left. And if you want to have your kids near you and have a stable, beautiful neighborhood, stop saying no to more development and opening the doors for others to come in. So that's just the kind of the top level of it. But we've got requirements that every half mile that's in a train station has to be zoned for housing. Change your zoning. We're also telling office conversions, you know, we'll make it worth your while to have office Midtown Manhattan. That could be a 24/7 livable neighborhood. Imagine if we brought on high-rise buildings converted into housing. The flooding of more units on the market will drive down the price. That's how you let people be able who work in the city, who work as doormen in the hotels and work in hospitalities and young tech startups and small business people can live in the same borough that they were born in, that they want to raise their family and they work in. And this is how you bring that connection. So again, everybody's saying it can't be done. I've been told that every single thing I want to do in my life. So I'm like, okay, put it on the list, put it on the list. And if I can have more thought leaders, you know, like people at CAP who talk about how this boldness is required now, because we're going to miss the boat. People are going to go elsewhere. And I can't let that be part of our New York story. We always are ever upward. Our slogan is Excelsior, ever upward. It doesn't mean stagnated. That's not sustainable for us.
You know, Governor, I'm at this point, I'm supposed to open it up to audience questions, but I'm going to abuse the privilege of the microphone for a minute longer because that last response really compels me to take this in a different direction. Instead of asking you another question about policy, I want to ask you a question about temperament and the temperature of the nation that we're in now and of your state. Last night, and I'm asking this from the point of view of the radical optimism that you're always demonstrating in your public service. Last night, we saw the President of the United States speaking about young people who are struggling with fentanyl addiction, the things that we have to do to shore up Social Security and Medicare. There was heckling that was going on from the opposition party in that well. At a moment when I think we need comity in our politics, when things like the infrastructure bill are intended to cut across our partisanship, given that you have tried to the best of your ability to make Albany a non-combat arena these days, I wonder how you're thinking about that spirit of coming togetherness and how things like the infrastructure bill can help us push through the cleavages that exist in our society right now.
I am very optimistic about where we are. I think the president did an extraordinary job reaching his hand out across the aisle, pointing out all the areas where we have a common interest, whether it's, you know, knowing that there's so many families, Democrat, Republican, who've lost a loved one, including my own, to substance abuse, overdose. I mean, I don't know a single family that's not been touched by that. Areas like mental health, childcare, infrastructure, when I worked as an attorney for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan a long time ago, the areas where you could always find comedy was on infrastructure and the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill had subsidies for the rural areas, but it also had money for food programs for the urban areas. So I've lived that. That's how I operate, because I saw how successful it was in a different era, different political times, but I never lost that sense of great possibilities. And just as an example, this morning I had a meeting of my congressional delegation, Democrats and Republicans. You have a lot more Republicans, at least temporarily. And a lot of them are from Long Island, meeting them for the first time. And we had a chance to really talk about some of the issues I just mentioned, and they want to work with us. They want to be partners. If they're saying that, I will reach out. And again, I said, at the end of the day, is Democrat, Republicans were Americans first, and we're New Yorkers first. So that's what I'm going to continue to do, because to do otherwise and just say, well, we can't get anything done until, these dynamics change in politics. There's too many needs that need to be met. The American people expect us to work together. They don't want to hear, but I was in Congress representing the most Republican district in the state of New York because I leaned hard into Medicare at the time when, under a different administration, they're talking about cutting Medicare. I went into nursing homes and diners and VFW homes and said, seriously, your mom's not going to have Medicare, your grandma's not going to have Medicare. That was a area where a Democrat won in a Republican area talking about something that's universally loved. That's what we're going to keep doing. That's how we're going to take back the House. That's how we're going to make sure Joe Biden gets reelected. Just exactly what he said last night. Speak to the people where they are. Don't make it all fancy policy and 1-point plan, 2-point plan. People don't want to know that. Say, do you have my back or not? You're looking out for me or not? It's that simple.
Amen. Governor, your enthusiasm is a force multiplier. With that, let's get some questions, Billy.
Our question from the audience is, with all the new job opportunities that are booming throughout New York, what is the state doing to ensure that those opportunities are accessible for the communities hit hardest by the pandemic, like women, the LGBTQ community, Black and impoverished communities?
We do it very intentionally. It's about where you're doing your recruiting to do the education and the training. So a lot of these jobs, some require a couple years of skills, a couple years of job training. So we're going into those neighborhoods. We're literally building these projects in those neighborhoods. Buffalo, New York, for example, a large workforce development center is right in the middle of the east side of Buffalo, the most impoverished area, one of the highest child poverty rates in the nation. We built the training center in that neighborhood, so no one even has to take a bus to get there. And the neighborhood is going to be lifted up by this alone. And the jobs are going to be attracted to people right in that neighborhood. So it's where you're putting the job training programs and the jobs follow. So that's the logic behind hitting those communities that were hit so hard, especially underserved communities, Black and brown communities. My gosh, on the healthcare disparities, which we're dealing with it now, because what happened during the pandemic was a bright spotlight was put on the fact that we had higher mortality rates in those communities, and that was not acceptable. And we're fighting back to make sure that never ever happens again. But those jobs, I can't wait to open the door to so many more people to have them, because as I saw with my own family, the dignity of a job changes everything. Where you can go from immigrant grandparents who left tremendous poverty in Ireland to a granddaughter who can be a governor of New York. I want that same shot for every young person in New York State. I'm excited about it.
Governor, because I filibustered just a little bit up here, we don't have time for any more questions from the audience, but I want to thank you for grounding us in lived experience. We have a way in the United States of stigmatizing challenge so that we don't talk about it, and we think everybody just arrived the way they are in their success. And you've always been honest and clear about where you've come from and where you're trying to get us all towards. And that's a powerful thing. And so thank you for that. And thank you for this. We appreciate you.
Please welcome to the stage the Governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, and Naveen Nayak, counselor to the Center for American Progress, and president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund.
Wait. Hello. Great to be here. And I know I think that either one will work. You can move the other one off. Let's see if it works. Very excited. Batting cleanup in our fantastic day here is the 75th governor of North Carolina, Governor Roy Cooper, and really excited to dive into a lot of things with him. But let me actually just start the conversation here. You have a great story of progress to tell, which I think we'll spend a lot of time on. But before we sort of talk about the opportunities these investments provide, I want you to talk about some of the challenges still you see in North Carolina's economy that you're really hoping that these, the investments from the federal level provide an opportunity to address and tackle.
Well, thanks, Davina. I'm glad to be here with Cap and all of you who are out there today trying to make progress across this country. We do have challenges. We have people who are living on the edge, who are facing the rising costs of gas and groceries. We see this federal funding as the opportunity for generational change. And I am so excited about the investments that we're going to be able to make. Think about connecting high-speed internet all across North Carolina for education, for remote medicine, for connecting small businesses to global economy. Think about the childcare investments that we've been able to make to get those kids early childhood and getting parents back into the workforce. Think about the clean energy economy that this legislation is ushering in. Think about the water systems that are being replaced all across North Carolina in areas that have been forgotten. I've been in communities that announced funding for areas where tears were running down people's cheeks because when they washed clothes, everything was yellow, and they felt that nobody was going to help them. There's so much more. Capping drug prices, getting a hold of that issue. There's so much here. And when you think about North Carolina, our Research Triangle Park was a vision for people decades ago that has paid off significantly for us now. We're going to be laying the groundwork with these generational funds to make sure that we're building a North Carolina, particularly based on advanced manufacturing, that's going to provide great paying jobs. My mission statement for North Carolina is to have a state where people are better educated, where they're healthier, where they have more money in their pockets. And that even gets applause in fifth grade classes. And to make sure that people have the opportunity to live lives of purpose and abundance. That's what I want. These funds, I think, will help us accomplish that mission.
Fantastic. Let's actually dive into some of the specifics. You've been governor now for 6 years. You've had a real turnaround in the states. A lot of sort of rankings have it as the #1 state now to do business. I think one of the real success stories has been, obviously North Carolina was a huge manufacturing state 40 years ago, textiles, furniture. There's been a real transition, and you're starting to see under your leadership, sort of a resurgence in sort of advanced manufacturing. I want to talk both about some of the successes you've seen, first from just a broader, the work that's been done to date, and then kind of looking ahead. I think one of the stories that's been really compelling in North Carolina is having sort of the workforce at the ready and the sort of partnerships you've built with some of the education institutions in order to have a workforce that's actually ready to do these kinds of jobs.
The first challenge we had when I got elected governor is getting North Carolina out of the cultural wars. Most of you remember the bathroom bill that caused significant economic boycotts in our state. Not only was it the wrong thing to do for people, but it hurt our state economically. And I worked to get that legislation fully repealed now. Then we built on what I believe decades of progress in creating the best community college system in the country, along with the best array of public and private universities in the country. I talked to CEOs
today, and they have three main issues: workforce, workforce, and workforce. They want well-trained, diverse employees. North Carolina has more four-year HBCUs than any other state in the country. North Carolina A&T State University graduates more Black engineers than any other state in the country, and was touting that to one CEO. He said they graduate more Black engineers every year than the state of Wisconsin. We've been able to reimagine manufacturing. You know, we had textile mills, furniture manufacturers that when the global competition started, they shuttered. But with advanced manufacturing and reimagining the way that we approach manufacturing, we are the second largest manufacturing, we have the second largest manufacturing population in the country. And we spent a lot of time selling these jobs to our workforce. It's not your father's manufacturing anymore. You got to know how to operate sophisticated equipment. And we've been able to leverage the educational institutions that we have. And then there has been a reemergence of work-based learning, apprenticeships that a lot of companies had gotten away from, but it had become more expensive. Invention is the mother of necessity. So these companies have gone back to that, and we have facilitated it with our community colleges and universities, and are really excited about the collaborations. For example, furniture manufacturing now has exploded, particularly high-end advanced manufacturing in the furniture belt. People who haven't been to the High Point furniture market in North Carolina, you need to go. It's quite an experience. But of course, they were looking for workforce. So we worked with the community college there to develop the Furniture Academy. And to get faculty, they had classes at night and used workers from the various furniture manufacturers in the area to teach these classes to grow the workforce. That kind of innovation has led to, among other factors, North Carolina being ranked by CNBC as the #1 state for business in the country. And a lot of people, as you can imagine, are trying to take credit for that. I'll tell you who gets the credit. It's the people of North Carolina. It is our workforce, which is dedicated, educated, diverse, and ready to go to work. And these companies are expanding and coming in droves to our state because of them.
Fantastic. And I actually want to dig in on another industry that I know you've been really focused on, which is sort of the clean energy and the sort of advanced automobile EV sector. An unbelievable story again. I think you're the 4th largest state for solar. And in the last year had big announcements from Toyota, Wolfspeed, and others starting to build some of these things in North Carolina. These new investments offer, I think by some estimates, nearly $3 billion for those kinds of technologies in the next 10 years. Talk more about, in that sector, there's again a real opportunity both for high-skilled, educated, four-year college degree educated workforce, but then also a lot of opportunities for people without a college degree, and how you sort of position the state and what you hope sort of the next 10 years will bring.
We have become the focal point of clean energy in the country. I am so excited about what's happening in North Carolina right now in the area of clean energy. And let's think about how we got here. First, we all know that we have to fight climate change, the existential threat. Hope we're not too late, but we have to make it an integral part of everything that we do. When President Trump got elected, he pulled us out of the Paris Accord. He worked to cut back safeguards on the environment, tried to stop offshore wind and increase offshore drilling. So governors got together and formed the Climate Alliance. Actually, we represented a majority of the people in the United States. And I and other governors started the effort to make sure our states we're fighting climate change. And I started with Executive Order 80. And then I had our current EPA Administrator Michael Regan was my Department of Environmental Quality Secretary. President stole him from me, but that's okay. Matter of fact, I told the president it was a great thing to do. I charged him with doing a stakeholder plan to reduce our power sector carbon emissions. They came up with a plan that's going to require carbon emission reductions 70% by 2030 to get to carbon net zero by 2050. And then with a Republican majority legislature, we were able to put it in the law. Now you ask me how, because climate change was not their big deal. Go back to putting money in people's pockets. They saw that we were attracting clean, because I made the clean energy sector a recruiting focal point for us. They saw that we had brought in an electric vehicle manufacturer, and then Toyota EV battery and Wolfspeed semiconductor to power it. And we just brought in Power, which is going to provide the infrastructure to charge the vehicle. That supply chain is going to be there, and it's going to put money in the pockets of North Carolinians. We were able to get them to agree to this because of the economics of it. And I think that that's going to be one of the keys across this country to fighting climate change, is making people understand that this is going to benefit everybody. This is where the private sector is going. You talk to these CEOs of auto companies across this country, they're falling all over themselves to get into the EV market and to make sure they are competitive. So if you have a state like North Carolina that's going to encourage that, then that's positive. So we're so excited about the Inflation Reduction Act because it helps us there to fund our EV infrastructure and to coax people into getting electric vehicles. And I've started an advanced clean trucks rule in North Carolina that's going to give North Carolina truck owners more choice and more competitive prices for EVs. A lot happening, a lot to be excited about.
That's fantastic. And we're also familiar with losing talent to the administration, but it's all for the good of the country. So you really are portraying North Carolina as something that the president talked about last night, being sort of the supply chain starting at home. And that's the story you're telling. I'm curious, maybe less from the policy side, but just to have you, I'm curious how much the citizens of North Carolina are starting to feel and hear this story, and how you're going about trying to tell it to make sure that after 40 years of cynicism, as you talked about, people sort of in communities watching factories and jobs go away, we are starting to see a difference, but how to make sure that it's sort of felt in a way that people do actually feel a bit more hopeful and optimistic about the future.
It's beginning. Businesses know it. Even small businesses know it because they see the incredible progress. A lot of families are still struggling. And one of the great things about the American Rescue Plan is that we were able to invest in childcare, put $800 million to increase salaries for these preschool teachers, to give them bonuses, to make sure that it's sort of a double progress here, and that you are able to get these children the early education that we know science tells us that is so critical for their future. But you're also able to get these parents into the workforce and businesses like that. So I think people are still frustrated with trying to find enough quality childcare for their children. They're frustrated still with how much things cost. In North Carolina, we still have 1 million people plus that don't have health insurance, including about a quarter of our early childhood educators. And talk about bipartisan efforts. We are this close to Medicaid expansion in North Carolina, which will provide health insurance for almost 600,000 working North Carolinians. I think the Republicans have now come around to the fact that this is going to be a positive thing. North Carolina, guys, has given up $521 million a month for every month we go without Medicaid expansion. And when we, for example, sometimes we have debates over gun violence, and I want them to take more action to make sure we reduce gun violence. And they tell me it's a mental health problem. And I say, fine, expand Medicaid. That's what we need to do. I mean, this is going to provide the signing bonus money that the Biden-Harris administration has provided for states who haven't done it to take the step to do it. It's going to be significant. The hospital assistant payments are going to really help our healthcare system. It's not a panacea, but these are the kind of things we're still working on it so that everyday people can see this progress. I mean, a lot of communities, I've talked to people who said, I now have high-speed internet because we already have hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone in. We didn't wait for the bipartisan infrastructure plan. We took some of our American Rescue Plan funds and began the process of connecting people to high-speed internet. So we already have people who are experiencing the benefits of these federal funds that are coming. We got to be ready to do it. That's the thing. And I told the president the other day, I said, here's my advice to you, sir. I said, this Congress, when you got a debate with them about whether the United States is going to pay our debts, you're not going to get any major legislation through. But what you've already done in these 2 years is more than what a lot of presidents can do in 8 years. And you need to work with the governors and the states to make sure that these generational investments that we've made actually work and actually are put into the ground and into the people to make sure that we're working the most effectively and efficiently if we can. I've appointed somebody to work like Mitch Landry is working for the president to coordinate all of my state agencies. I've told them I do not want a single federal dollar that's competitive to be on the table that North Carolina hasn't been in competition for, that we haven't put some first-class grant application up there for. We don't want anything to slip by us. And I think that's what the president is going to do over the next 2 years. And I know that governors across the country of both parties are going to work to make sure that we make the best use of these funds.
Let's hope so. That's great. Actually, I want to follow up on two things on that last point. One is you've been governor for 4 years when Donald Trump was president. Obviously, the last two, less from a partisan perspective, but really trying to suss out the importance and difference as a governor of having a partner in trying to sort of grow the economy in these ways versus your experience in the first 4 years. And then just following up on that last point, in more specificity, really what you're looking for the federal government to do to make sure that we are successful with the implementation of this opportunity.
Other than night and day, you know, it was a constant battle with the Trump administration. You know, he came in the middle of the pandemic. We all had to deal with that. And he, you know, vacillated between indifference and opposition, and governors ended up having to step up and do the job there. We kept getting promised infrastructure legislation that never came. And now we see action with the words, and we have a partnership in actually connecting people to high-speed internet, in making sure that we can take advantage of the clean energy economy and actually build these roads and bridges that we have to do. So we are excited about these 2 years. We see a significant difference in the way we are working with the federal government. And I look forward to the next 2 years because we got to do this right.
Great. I might have one more question, but let me open it up first because I know we have audience questions as well.
Yes, we do. The first is from one of our online audience members. The Carolina coast is particularly vulnerable to climate change, both from the sea level rise as well as stronger and more unpredictable storms and hurricanes. How can North Carolina leverage these federal investments to help prepare and strengthen these vulnerable areas?
One of the reasons that we know this fight against climate change is so important is that as you look at North Carolina, we jut out into the ocean. We have been hit hard by hurricanes and floods. In fact, you know, when you have two so-called 500-year floods within 23 months of each other, you don't have 500-year floods anymore. We have made it a point to make sure we are building back in a more resilient way. And that means making hard choices. That means strategic retreat in a number of areas where you have to get buy-in from communities and trying to find other places for them to yield, for them to live, and then using these areas as sponges to make sure that we are protecting our office buildings, our homes, our roads for the future. And it's a real challenge, but we have a strategic resilience plan in place to try and do that. And we're going to keep working toward those efforts.
Our next question focuses on equity. As new investments and funds flow to North Carolina, how are those funds allocated to Black and Brown and migrant-owned companies? And what safeguards are in place to ensure that those communities receive the funds and support of the government?
I think you can look at how my administration responded to the pandemic to get an idea of how important we believe that equity and inclusion is. We understood that, for example, when it was time to provide vaccines, and when there was a shortage of them, that we were concerned who was going to get those vaccines and who wasn't. So we set up a record in order to be able to track all of the demographic data, recognized and didn't adopt the federal record, recognized as one of the best in the country, so that we could see in real time what communities were not getting the resources that they need. And we responded to that and made sure our Black and Brown communities got the resources that they needed. I think you have to be intentional about what you do and recognize that a lot of communities have been underserved and under-resourced for years. And our Department of Health and Human Services, our Department of Environmental Quality, where I have put in place one of my executive orders, environmental justice efforts that we know are absolutely critical. You just have to ingrain it and make it a part of what you do and make sure it helps guide the funding streams. We are going to be intentional about that.
I have one final audience question, if that's okay. North Carolina has always been a textile manufacturing powerhouse. How is your administration investing in next-gen innovations in making textiles a green, sustainable 21st century powerhouse for Western North Carolina?
Well, we want to train the very best workforce in the country. We have the second largest advanced manufacturing workforce in the country. That's what you need to all across areas who want to build things and to make things and to create American jobs. I think the educational efforts that we've put forward with our community colleges and our universities and even our high schools is going to help us create that workforce that we need to handle any kind of advanced manufacturing. But we're going to concentrate on making sure that our workers are ready today and tomorrow.
Fantastic. I'm going to take one last question. I think maybe a good way to close out our conversations with leaders like yourself and try to tap some of your wisdom, having had a lot of success already and looking ahead. You said at the top, this is a once in a generation opportunity. What do we, all of us collectively who want to make sure we seize this opportunity, what are some things we really have to pay attention to so that 10 years from now, we're not sitting here regretting that we missed a chance to sort of make sure we are building an economy that is both sustainable, resilient, and that everyone sort of is benefiting from?
I think we have to push our governors, our state legislatures, our cities and our counties to make sure that we don't replace this money, that we don't take it and cut taxes for the wealthy and put it in recurring efforts that are already being funded. And there are already some efforts across the country to do that. We need to make sure that we understand that this money is for new infrastructure, for innovation, looking at decades down the road, and keeping the political pressure on those who are making the decisions about how these investments are going to be made, is critical because we got the funding out there ready to go. How it's done is going to be critical. And it's going to be a fight, but I think everybody in this room can help us win that fight.
Fantastic. That's a great place to close. Governor, I just want to thank you again for your service. You've been a really model public servant, legislature, I didn't mention, as Attorney General, and just really eager to continue partnering with you as Governor of North Carolina for the next 2 years.
Thanks, Naveen. Thank you, guys.
You know, I think I'm one of the registered chartered members of the Governor Cooper fan club. Can we get another round of appreciation for our phenomenal governor from North Carolina? You know, what a great day we've had. Thank you so very much for joining us in person and those who are part of our online community. I think that this ticket was at least as hot as Beyonce's Renaissance tour, right? This was a good day. You know, from the very beginning right up through the end of it, the opening conversation between Jonathan Capehart and Wes Moore, where Wes Moore really grounded us, I thought, in soaring ambition, but really practical goals that we have to meet and we have to measure every single day. I was really moved when Governor Moore said that when he was out leading troops in Afghanistan, he never had a conversation with anybody in his unit about what their political partisanship was. Instead, they had their eyes focused on a mission that they were trying to accomplish. I think that's a great metaphor that we should extend out through the work of implementation on IRA and on the infrastructure bill as well. When Governor Moore said that he was thinking every single day and every decision he's making about the impact on next generations, it seemed to me that everything that we do should be suffused with this sense of thinking fundamentally, essentially, and intentionally for the sake of posterity. I really want to appreciate what Governor Walz and Governor Hochul brought to the table when they talked about the transformation of the workforce in their states and what they have to do to invest in the preparation of that transition for communities that have traditionally been left behind. Governor Cooper at the end here said that it's going to be a tough fight, but there's no fight that I think that Governors Walz and Hochul would ever shy away from. And they were pushing back against the cynicism in their states, which I think should be a real inspiration for us at the national level. One of the great things when you bring leaders from around the country together, you pick up some interesting colloquialisms. From now on, I'm going to adopt Mayor Stoney's line about how he was hotter than fish grease. I'm going to apply it all the time. And I think coming off of the incredible State of the Union by President Biden last night, some of the pushback that we're getting as we try to center those who have been in the margins of outcomes, all of us should be hotter than fish grease and determined to work with the fierce urgency of now to get the big, hard things done. And I want to just kind of sit in what Mayor Bowser said to us about how it really matters who the messenger is on some of these tough issues, whether it's on climate or infrastructure or building inclusive economies. We have to remember that people are most effectively moved by their neighbors. And we have to take the conversation that we have at the national level at 30,000 feet and ground it in that neighborly experience and have average Americans serving as ambassadors for the delivery of these programs. And I want to really thank Governor Cooper for closing us out here and reminding us all that people need to be able to see themselves in these outcomes. And by people, he meant whether they were corporate CEOs or folks who are just trying to make sure that their kids are able to go into a classroom that has fundamentally decent infrastructure where they can carry their dignity into the room and back out into community. Phenomenal set of conversations for us at CAP. This is the opening bid on our 20th anniversary year. We're going to keep asking the tough questions. We're going to keep interrogating policy leaders, and we're going to continue to partner with progressive leaders like you who are here in this room and who are online to get the business of the people done. Thank you all so very much.